Notice of this meeting was given to the township clerk and posted on township bulletin board and township website calendar and sent to the West Orange Chronicle and Star Ledger. This meeting has been properly noticed to the public in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. No new matters will start after 10:30 p.m. May I ask everybody to rise for the pledge of allegiance?
You already.
There you go.
That was on mute.
Okay, the next planning board regular meeting will be held on February 5th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. The next planning board special meeting will be held on February 12th at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. May I have the roll call, please, Yamilet?
Mr. Alpert,
Here.
Mr. Klein is joining us via Zoom. Mr. Wilks,
Here.
Councilwoman Scarpa,
Here.
Mayor McCartney,
Present.
Mr. Guarino,
Present.
Chairman Baga,
Here.
Mr. Cardoza won't be joining us tonight
Thank you.
unless he shows up.
Okay, thank you. We'll swear in the township professionals, Ms. McGovern.
Mr. Hazel, Mr. Hess, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you. We have an ordinance amending and supplementing Chapter 2, subsection 61 Pedestrian Advisory Board, Complete Streets Ordinance, Master Plan Consistency Review. An ordinance amending the supplemental Chapter 2, subsection 61 Pedestrian Safety Advisory Board of the revised general ordinance of the Township of West Orange, establishing a complete and green streets advisory committee and creating a complete and green streets policy. Ordinance number 2025-XX. We have a memorandum from the Nishawane Group, authored by Mr. Hazel, that finds that this ordinance is consistent with the master plan. Do you have anything to add to this, Mr. Hazel? Your report of January 29, 2025.
No, I don't.
Okay. Does any member of the board have any questions about this ordinance? Seeing none, I make a motion that we recommend to the town council to adopt this ordinance as written and presented to the planning board. Do I have a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman seconds on the motion, Yamilet.
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Wilks,
Yes.
Councilwoman Scarpa,
Yes.
Mayor McCartney,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino,
Yes.
Chairman Baga.
Yes, motion carries. Ms. McGovern, will you advise the town council that we recommend adoption of this ordinance?
Here the report and send it to you for your signature.
Thank you. We now have application PB 24-01 West Essex Highlands Incorporated, Block 179, Lot 32, IH1 Zone, Warner Road. The applicant is proposing to develop a 496 unit inclusionary multifamily residential development on a vacant 120 property in the northwest corner of the township of West Orange. Mr. Plucker for the applicant.
Hi, good evening, Chairman Bagoff. Brian Plucker from the firm of Hutch Manowitz and Plucker here on behalf of West Essex Islands, Inc. Okay, just before we start tonight, I understand that the objector's attorney, Mr. Afrin, is ill and will not be here. I know we had some communications. I'll just confirm for the board and his group and for Mr. Afrin, if he's watching, hope you feel better. And to the extent we need to bring any witness back tonight for cross-examination, we will do so. We just don't know when that may be. We may have to work the schedule a little bit, but we will agree to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Plucker.
All right, the applicant would like to call Mark Seal. Mr. Seal,
Yeah, I have to give you. You put your full name on the record?
Marks Kevin Seal.
Seal, S-E-E-L, correct?
Correct.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
okay, thank you, Mr. Seal. If you would just offer your credentials for the board, tell them in what respect you're here to testify tonight, and just give a little bit about your education, background, and experience.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. I have over 30 years of experience in geological and geotechnical engineering throughout the United States and overseas. I have a bachelor's degree from Colorado School of Mines in geological engineering and a
I'm sorry,
master's.
could you talk into the microphone, sir?
Yeah, sorry. I have a bachelor's degree in geological engineering from Colorado School of Mines and a master's degree in engineering, environmental and geotechnics from Stevens Institute of Technology. Over 30 years of experience working throughout New Jersey as well as the rest of the United States and overseas. Projects I've worked on are in development areas of small scale, large scale, residential, retail, industrial, commercial, energy, power, all areas of infrastructure within the built environment. And as I said, specializing in ground and down geotechnical engineering. I focus on development and supervision of geotechnical investigations, geological investigations, as well as interpretation of the data and the development of solutions and recommendations for development of ground as well, and including stabilizing slopes, et cetera.
And you're licensed in New Jersey?
I am licensed in New Jersey as well as a dozen other states in both in geology and in civil engineering.
And your license is in good standing?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Do any member of the board have any questions? Seeing none, we will accept Mr. Fiel as a licensed geotechnical expert in the state of New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Mr. Seal, I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you just initially explain to the board what you were retained to do by the applicant, what you did and what your findings were?
Yes, of course. So, yeah, thank you. I was retained, or our firm was retained to basically assess whether or not the building D, which is at the top of a slope, is safe to build at the top of that slope. So what we had done to evaluate that condition is to do a subsurface investigation that consisted of drilling 4 soil borings and some rock coring, as well as another 8 additional test pits to evaluate the ground conditions throughout the slope. At the top of this slope where the building D is located, as well as further down slope to the east, we ran some laboratory tests to determine certain soil rock parameters, strength parameters, and we ran slope stability analysis using state-of-the-art computer software programs to evaluate the ground conditions. What we found in our investigation was that the soil profile is generally very dense, and it's overlying a relatively hard and relatively hard rock, and the subsurface conditions at the time we investigated were dry. The slope itself is fairly densely vegetated, as it's perhaps well understood, and which includes significant tree cover as well. And we found that this type of soil profile and the generally shallow slope, which is on the order of between 10 and 17 degrees from horizontal, so again relatively flat, tends to be inherently stable, given the strength of the materials that are involved in our analysis. And we found that they are inherently stable, both under the existing condition, and there was no change when we analyzed the condition where building D is put in place at the top of that slope. So our analyses proved or showed us that the slope is both inherently stable under the existing conditions as well as the proposed future conditions.
Just for the record, Mr. Seal, we did file with the board a report from Langen Engineering. There's an executive summary letter dated January 14, 2025, followed by a more comprehensive report dated January 14, 2025. I just wanted to confirm that that report was prepared by you and or under your supervision with Langen.
That is correct.
And you rely on that report today and support its contents, data that's contained therein in the conclusions.
That is correct.
All right, I have nothing further for Mr. Seal.
Okay. So we'll go around the board. Mayor McCartney, do you have any questions for Mr. Seal on his testimony?
Actually, thank you for being here, because that was one of my major concerns that I have been talking to our engineer about that slope. The township had adopted a steep slope ordinance in 2021. So we're straddling this application and that ordinance. And I wanted some assurances about the stability of that slope. So I guess we'll dig further into this. No pun intended, but thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Mayor McCartney. Vice Chairman Garino, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Alpert, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
In the report, one of the graphics in the report shows building D where it is, and it also shows a drawing of a line that's labeled, I think on the report as the top of the slope or the approximate top of the slope. I know there's been some back and forth and question and previous testimony from other witnesses on the concept of the zoning allowing for building only on the one side of the, I think the ridge line is the expression that's used, if I'm remembering it correctly, but that's not net. How far is the closest approach of building D to the actual top of the slope to that line that's on your map?
To the, so there's two lines on the drawing. One is a limited disturbance line, but actually, and there's
yes.
this other line that you're referring to. The closest point is about 13 feet as I recall it.
So I think it was 7 feet from the line of disturbance or the area of disturbance line, but it's 13 feet from the top of the
That's-
slope.
I'd have to verify, but that's what I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wilks, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
No question at this time.
Councilperson Scarpa, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
Not at this time.
Mr. Hess, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
Just one quick question. Is there any seismic risk at the property?
So in terms of size, generally speaking, in New Jersey, the seismic risks are low. There is a mapped, what's called a fault, which is a discontinuity in the rock that is, I believe it was maybe a half a mile or a quarter mile, something like that away. Sorry, I'll repeat that. There is a mapped, what's a fault, which is a discontinuity in the rock, but there's no activity on it that's in the record, and which is generally consistent with a lot of the other findings and that are available for seismic risk. So our finding is that there's a very low seismic risk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hazel, do you have any questions for Mr. Seelan's testimony?
Yes, just to pick up on Mr. Hess's, is there any risk when you factor any type of blasting into the process?
So any type of blasting, I would just exercise caution for all of us on that phrasing. I would say blasting of any rock can be done safely. I have been involved in projects where I've recommended blasting within a foot of high-rise foundation buildings, towers, as long as there's controlled blasting techniques that are put into place. Blasting can be done very safely in any of these settings.
But is there anything particular about this profile, as you mentioned, that makes it a little more at risk with blasting or?
No, there's nothing about this site that has an inherent, in my view, has an inherent risk of blasting. As long as controlled blasting techniques are properly implemented, there's no risk.
Thank you.
Let the record show that Mr. Cardoza has joined the board. Mayor McCartney, question.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Salem,
Yes.
that Mr. Hazel's question begs the question about, is there anything that the applicant has to do to shore up the slope if there is any blasting building going on?
No, typically what would happen under development is that the contractor, or the design or construction documents are prepared in the manner that require such measures be implemented, and then the contractor would implement those properly. So that would be done at the drill site. So there'd be nothing needed within the slope. Our findings under our slope stability, under a seismic analysis, show that it is still stable. So as long as blasting is controlled, I don't see a risk to the slope.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
great. Thank you. Do any members of the public have any question for Mr. Seelan's testimony? Please come up to the microphone, state your name and be identified. Ladies and gentlemen, questions start with if, when, why, what, where, which. please don't testify to something that you know personally. Ask the expert about testimony they have provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Barbara White. And I
Welcome.
get a smile. I'm often the first person to ask the first question. So my question for you. Pools where board will be, et cetera, and then over the course of time, 4 buildings. So you did mention that there is nothing that you're aware of that would preclude doing blasting. I'm very interested in 2 things. One is that when you have multiple blast sites in a 36-acre space, that's number one. And the second is, as the work goes along, is there an opportunity to retest for any movement, et cetera, as some of this major blasting takes place?
Well, on the first part, we were retained to look at strictly at the slope issue, so I can't really, I'm not familiar with the other aspects of the site, but in general, when we talk about blasting, as long as blasting is properly staged and carefully implemented, I wouldn't see, I wouldn't expect there to be any compounding effect, if that's what your question is.
That's actually the second question, yes,
Yeah.
because I understand this
Right.
would be over a prolonged period of time, multiple blasting for multiple reasons, from foundation to water, et cetera. So again, is there a possibility of cumulative effect? Or how would we know that? And it may be outside of your testimony, but.
Yeah, I think that is outside of my testimony, but as it relates to the building, I would expect that if rock is blasted to construct the building foundations, that it would be done in a sequenced manner. It would be relatively short term, and because the soil profile is probably granular and relatively very dense, I don't expect there to be any negative impacts on the stability of the slope.
Okay. Mr. Bagoff, I don't know if I can ask a question or is yeah. With considering all the blasting over a very long period of time, would it be appropriate for the planning board to ask that there's something that will ensure that there is testing as this construction goes along, which can be multiple years, to ensure that there is no issue with respect to blasting damage?
I think that's going to be up to the building department. Once they get the documents, they will work with the engineering firm to ensure that everything is within code and within state regulations. Would that be reasonable to say?
That's not a condition, or is that what you want to make?
No,
it
that's
as
not a condition, but that's what normally happens. Mr. Plucker, I see.
Yeah, I say that is standard procedure in my client throughout this process. And in any period of compliance, we will be working with the town professionals in connection with that item as with respect to many others.
Sure.
As well.
It's the way things are done on a regular basis with the township building department.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Come right up, young lady. State your name for the record.
It's 19 Howell Drive. MEYEROWITZ. My question, from looking at the report, I looked at most of it. I don't see any reference to Howell Drive. You look solely down the other side of the slope, but I mean, everybody on Howell Drive is at the bottom of the slope as well. Looks like that wasn't considered at all.
That's the area to the,
Mr. Seal, could you speak into the microphone, please?
yeah, that's to the north.
Below the cul-de-sac.
It's below the
where
cul-
will, get runoff and water and.
Yeah,
everything
understood.
From above the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
We believe we're a slope at the bottom of the slope as well.
I just want to say, to the extent of that runoff is going to be discussed, I don't think Mr. Seal testified about stormwater and drainage and things of that nature. Not to say they're not important to you, and we recognize that they are, but his testimony in his report was limited to the stability of the location of Building D.
But building D is right above our house. So I mean, how do you know that there's no impact of building D on the homes on Hell Drive?
He didn't speak about water runoff.
No, not about water. I'm
Okay.
talking about building D and the stability of the slope below building D, because there's slope on 2 sides of. Okay.
What aspect, I'm sorry, what aspect, he's a geotechnical expert. So is there something that he testified to?
I'm saying you did soil samples and everything for the slope down to Nestro on that side, but did you do any testing on Howell Drive and the impact of building D on Howell Drive?
No, there's no analysis in our report for that. We took borings at accessible locations along a few different places behind building D. And we found all that material to be generally very consistent. So I'm expecting that the same would apply elsewhere, but nothing as specific was analyzed between building D and the location that you're referencing.
Thank you.
Step up, sir. State your name for the record, please.
Okay, hi, my name is Victor Misardi. Misarti. Yeah, my property is right at the bottom of that hill and I'm familiar with, quite a bit of rock. There's a little bit of soil and then a lot of rock. But my question is about the rock and the blasting and the geotechnical I'm not sure, you tell me, maybe it's construction related. But can this rock up on top be blasted? I mean, we've got underground utilities, these large detention basins, the foundations for the buildings. I mean, is this capable of being blasted, over this to remove all that rock?
Blasting as a method of excavation is it is one of the preferred methods for excavating this type of material. The material tends to be very, very hard. It's not easy to excavate. Blasting affords a relatively more rapid form of excavation, and it's appropriate to use for this rock materials that are at the site.
Okay, and then it all has to be carted away or removed or something from the site?
Either reused somewhere else on site or removed. I don't know what the plan is for that.
My second question then is, will the blasting cause any harm to the neighboring houses, neighboring properties right over there? Does that affect their foundations, for instance?
So what I testified to earlier was the use of controlled blasting techniques. This is limiting the amount of charge per delay as the shots are produced, the amount of burden or amount of material that gets blasted, things of that nature. So as long as these are properly implemented, those types of methods, I would expect not. And there's also a monitoring program that should be implemented along with any blasting program that ensures that provides an understanding of what the impacts could be and assures the safety of the program.
Okay, I'm sorry, you said monitoring program?
Monitoring, correct.
Okay. Okay, so it's not going to be disrupting the other.
What we would expect, or what we recommend for any blasting program, is that there's always monitoring associated with it. So vibration monitors would be set up to understand what energy is getting beyond the line of excavation.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. State your name, sir.
My name is James White.
Thank you, sir.
I reside at 1399 Pleasant Valley Way. Hello, Mr. Steele. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very well.
Thank you.
Mr. Steele, are you aware that there was ahistoric flooding in West Orange approximately 2 years ago that caused a severe amount of damage to the town?
I'm not intimately familiar with it
Okay.
now.
The reason why I asked this is I'm curious if in your analysis, you had mentioned that the fault line and the stability was tested for all expected weather patterns. Well, we've had some pretty severe aberrations to weather, not just here in New Jersey, not just here in West Orange, but all throughout the country. Storms that were dropping multiple inches per hour, that kind of thing.
Right.
Would your analysis be able to guarantee the stability of that slope if such a storm were to arrive?
Well, as part of our analysis, we did look at raising the water table. So our findings in our borings and test pits showed no water table present. And despite that, and despite there was a lack of evidence that there even was a seasonal water table, we did modify the water table as part of our analysis. We brought it up close to the ground surface. So in other words, the full saturation of the ground, and it was still stable.
Okay, and looking at the full saturation of the ground, would that also account for completely atypical, such as 4 or 5 times the amount of rain that normally falling on it at the same time? Would it also account for that?
It doesn't.
The weight of water on top of it?
Well, we don't look at the intensity of storms. This is for a slope. You're looking at water within the pore spaces and this soil profile is about as strong as it gets.
Okay, well, the part of West Orange that collapsed had stood for my entire lifetime and my mother's entire lifetime. So we can't really use what would typically happen in those kinds of situations, not to testify. But I'll move on. The next question I have is, you said several samples were taken around the area, but not in the area of Howell Drive. Is that correct?
Correct. Nothing between the building and Howell Drive. It was taken between building D and that
Okay.
long eastern slope.
And you said in your testimony that you expect them to be the same and consistent with the samples that you took from the other side. Is that correct?
Yeah, we expect that the conditions are generally very stable. We also analyzed a relatively weaker soil profile than the data showed us in our borings.
Okay, but what do you expect that, or what do you base that expectation on other than junction?
It's a professional experience and our observation of the site conditions.
So your professional experience allows you to know what is going on 30 feet under the ground, 50 feet away from where you took the last sample? Just to throw out some random numbers.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, how many samples did you take, sir?
So we did 4 borings and 8 test pits.
4 borings and 8 test bits?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And based on 4 borings and 8 test bits, you feel as if you have a complete understanding and faith in the stability of an area that's something like 36 acres, is that correct?
That
Or what, how many acres? is it? I'm sorry.
I just want to make clear that his report was limited to the stability of for the location of building D.
Building D, okay.
Yeah,
What is
just so we have a
the
clear record, sir.
acreage of that area? He knows,
I don't know what the exact
Okay.
acreage is.
but you feel that the 4 borings and 8 test bits was sufficient to understand the area, given that. if-
Yes, it's my professional opinion that
Keep the same person talking.
Sure. So you feel confident to that point that nothing can happen that would cause any of this to cause an avalanche or anything like that, or cause anything to shear and endanger the lives of citizens of our town? Based
that
on that, you feel extremely confident, 100%?
I would say considering all the investigation that we did and the fact that the slope is very gentle, it's a 17-degree slope at the most,
Mhm.
which is 3 on 1, and the balance of it is much flatter than that, that the risk that you've just described doesn't exist.
Okay, based on that area
Correct.
specifically.
Correct.
That's it for now.
Thank you. Come right up, state your name, please.
Rachel Klein. I live on Hell Drive as well. I have a couple general questions and then a specific. I guess the first one would be, could you provide just a map of I can see where you took the borings from my house because it's marked in very bright pink. And at this time of year, you can obviously see that. But I think some people are curious about where you actually took it. Would it be possible to provide the public with a map of sites looking down?
There is, within our report, there is a figure that shows the location.
Can you-
You can have it on the screen.
We're going to get you the page, Mr. Fagan.
Yeah, I mean, like, I couldn't really see it out my kitchen window.
Yeah, can you zoom in?
Yeah, that's the. Yes, correct.
Joe, this would be page 8.
Yeah.
Um.
March 26th.
Yeah, say.
That's it.
They should have done this for the record, what we're looking at, so.
What page is this in your report? Do you have a page number?
It's, well, it's an executive summary at the beginning, Diane, Ms. McGovern, and there's the report proper, but total, it's a 73-page PDF, and it's page 8 of 73 of the PDF.
Thank you.
This is of the Langen report from January of this year.
I mean,
Just instructing what you want to do.
oh, no, people were just curious. That was like and I saw the size of the machine and I'm guessing that the machine couldn't actually go on the slope because all the sites looked pretty flat. None of these actual tests were into any of the actual sloping parts. I mean, it was a huge machine. And I know from where like I could see it from my backyard goes pretty high up and most of these are on pretty flat sites that the samples were taken. Do you know anything different?
Well, the borings and test pits were taken as they're shown on here, and some of them are on they are steeper areas. The site itself is generally flat.
The
So
site where building D is going to go.
where these
you-
borings and I'm saying where along these two magenta profile lines, these two long horizontal lines, you see a series of test pits and borings. I'm saying that profile is generally relatively flat, and I know that means different things to different peoples. Some people might,
I think people think
you-
flat means like there's no hill.
yeah, well, I would say relatively flat in terms of slope. So which means, so at 10 degrees, it's relatively flat in terms of stability. If a soil material is very dense, it has a very high degree of strength relative to the slope. So if it has 34 degrees of friction and your slope is only 10 degrees, the material is inherently much more stable than the driving forces would otherwise allow to shear it.
The other general questions was, whose decision was it to do this stability study? Was it you were hired by the developer, but was it the planning boards? Do you know, or was it the developer's curiosity?
I don't know. The request came through the owner.
I'll make that representation based on the comments and questions that we received at earlier hearings and the concern by the public, which we respected. We decided to go out, retain Langen, and Langen performed this study on behalf of us. We then filed it with the board, and we have Mr. Seal here tonight.
So you decided the scope as well, we're assuming? The developer.
Based upon the comments, and there were a lot of comments made about the location of Building D and why that was chosen and the specific location it was in. Based upon those comments, we had Langen prepare the report regarding the stability of the proposed location of Building D as set forth on the site plan.
But I think you're asking if who prepared the boring locations. That was us. It was an independent review of the ask, and we developed this program.
So before you came to the site, were you familiar with the history of the land, the site, things that have been developed around the ridgeline before, like the Highlands, the house on Howell Drive, the Grand?
I can't say that I personally was familiar with all the development around the site.
So the planning board said that they do these kinds of tests and studies before any developments get done for safety, stability. When the Grand was built and they did the top of the Grand, there was a landslide and it knocked a couple houses on Nestro
I'm sorry.
right below it.
Okay, you're testifying. You can ask questions about what he said. Please don't testify. The public comment
So,
when
okay.
everything's done.
So were you aware of the landslide in a very close location to this on the same, it wasn't owned by the same owner, it was the same ridgeline hill and continuous forest
Yeah, no, I was
at the
not.
very top of the same slope, just further south?
No, I wasn't familiar with it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask another question?
State your name again, sir.
Okay, sure. Victor Misardi, Misarti.
Thank you.
Thank you. After I see the map, I have a question. The purple circles, those are borings or test pits? Those are
Yes, the
locations?
purple symbols are borings or test pits. It's hard to see, from this, but some of them are labeled LB, which would be a boring, and TP would be a test pit.
Okay, okay. Because I'm just wondering, for instance, the boring machines, I guess they're on trucks. But how, I mean, that's a very steep slope. How do they drive? I can't imagine truck driving down that slope to do the borings.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Okay, the question is, how did you drive a truck down to those locations?
Well, what we do in areas where there's difficult terrain, we have an all-terrain vehicle. It could be
Oh.
tracked or a rubber tired that is capable of getting up and down steeper slopes.
Okay, so I could tracked a machine.
Correct. It could be
with-
track machine, it could be ATV. I don't recall what was used here.
Yeah, so just-
Yeah, it could be either or, tracked or rubber tire that has all-terrain
That's very
capability.
steep. I can't imagine. Okay, all right. That answers it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of the members of the public have any questions for Mr. Seal on his testimony? Please come up and state your name.
Good evening, my name is Oren Knights.
Go right ahead, sir.
I have a question for you and for the planning board. In regards to your blasting, was there a study? I know we're talking about building D, which is the focus right now. And where building D is, there's a slope that goes down to, for instance, Rosemont Terrace and the other streets next to it. Now, for instance, Rosemont Terrace over the years has had tremendous flooding, like people's homes, basements. It's been flooded. And we have heavy rains. Was there a study done by your company regarding the other streets or just in that area?
Again, I don't think Mr. Seal testified as to stormwater runoff or drainage. I'm sorry, I don't know what the question is
You're
then.
asking, was this another study done in another area?
For instance, right under
It's on.
building D, it's a slope and then there's streets down there.
Okay, so are you hearing the question?
I think
So,
if,
for instance, Rosemont Terrace, it's a street right at the bottom.
I believe if your question is, did Langen do a study about stormwater runoff from the site down to Rosemont? The answer is,
Not stormwater runoff, but the impact that the blasting is gonna have on the homes at the bottom of that area. Because we're talking about a bedrock that might be unstable in that area. Now, has there been a study regarding the foundation, the bedrock in that area? Because where building D is kind of close to the slope, am I right? Not much
Yeah.
space. So did
Correct.
you guys study that area, and did you study the impact it's gonna have on the residents at the bottom, their homes, the foundation, even? This is also, well, I have a question for the planning board as well. Have you studied that? Has there been a plan, a study, and who authorizes it? And has there been a?
You gotta do one at a time. You keep asking and then you keep adding to your question. So
Well, he's not answering my question,
Well-
so that's why I'm at it.
he has.
I'm just waiting for you to pause.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll
okay.
pause right now.
So, okay, so I first of all, it was not my testimony that the rock is unstable. It's inherently stable. So I don't know, I can't speak to inherent instability in the rock. No, we did not perform any assessment of, we were not tasked with looking at blasting. Our scope was strictly for looking at the stability of the slope with respect to building D.
So have you spoken to the residents at the bottom of that area? Has there been a study regarding the impact of your project? Or it's just been a study in that particular area? That's what I'm asking.
The ask of Langen was to look at the stability of that slope with respect to building D. That's what we performed.
Well, I have a question for the planning board. For instance, if there is impact on the residents at the bottom, the homes. Because as we know, if you have an earthquake, it has residual effects, aftershocks. So if one of our homes are damaged, the foundation, is there going to be some kind of an escrow setup that's going to compensate residents for any kind of damage that the blasting might cause?
I
This is
believe,
for the city.
I believe the policy is the building department will be notified and the zoning official, they'll come out, they'll take a look at the area and they'll contact the engineer for the applicant and they will evaluate it from there. And I believe that's the standard policy of how the town works. So there is a protection. I believe that there is a protection, but we will make sure that we will contact the building department and get you a better answer.
Thank you.
So Ms. McGovern, you'll contact the building department so we do have a better answer. And we'll post that answer on our website. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Patrick Laterza, Laterza. So a couple quick questions. One, why were those specific locations chosen for the borings along those lines?
Partly because of, partly from access, our field people, our project manager determined locations that were appropriate. One of them is near that knob that's going to be excavated, which is on the B line. We wanted to get as close to that as we could, and there's some steeper slopes in there. And similarly on the A line, it's an area where there are some steeper slopes that were accessible.
Okay, so it's not, those look like less steep areas than other areas. Is it perhaps
Well,
because they're
so
less steep when you're saying access?
let me explain how I see that it's the steepness, relative steepness, where the contour lines, which are the dashed lines that run perpendicular to the two purple lines, and they have little numbers within them. When those get closer together, that indicates a steeper. Thank you. Oh, great. Thank you. So for example, here, these lines between this heavy dash line and this heavy dash line, those are contour intervals. And I think these might be 1 foot contour intervals. So you can see the distance from here to here is relatively larger than from here to here. So this section of slope would be considered relatively steeper than this and much steeper than this and so forth. So that's how we are trying to, when we set borings up, given the inherent difficulties in navigating a site, we target certain things. One, we want it to be as close to this area because we knew that this was a closer impingement. And then on the limited disturbance here at the slope and its proximity to the general top of slope. And we wanted to get as much of the steeper area in as we could. That's generally what drives the location of siting borings and test pits.
So I'm just going to say what I think I'm getting is that you're saying that those areas were more accessible because they're not as steep as those other areas.
That is not what I'm saying.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm saying what we're attempting to do is get in where we can get into areas that are relatively steeper. And that may not have been achieved in every location, but we have, there's not a dramatic difference in the relative steepness of some of these locations.
And you're not saying that those areas, when you said 10 to 12 degrees, you're not saying those areas are 10 to 12 degrees.
No, these areas are a little bit, these areas here are a little bit steeper, right in here, for example.
How steep would you say those areas are?
We roughly 17, 20 degrees maybe. The overall from up in here down to here roughly is about a 10-degree slope.
I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but that doesn't look like that to me. But I guess my other question is, when it comes to blasting,
Yes.
I think you already said this, but just to be certain, so you're saying that you'd most likely have to blast in this area in order to excavate because of the density of the stone.
That's one method. Yeah, there are several different methods, drilling and breaking with hoe rams is another method, but blasting tends to be most productive. It's the quickest, it's the least overall impact on a community. But it's because of the relative hardness, contractors tend to prefer using blasting.
Is there any sort of danger when it comes to sequence of blasting as opposed to just the overall blasting? In other words, if you were to blast one area versus another and one after another, would that lead to potential collapse of an area versus blasting one area and then another?
Blasting is generally sequenced, determined by the blaster. And there's several different things that go into determining what the appropriate blast sequence is. But your question is unfortunately, it's very broad, so it's harder to address. But if a properly developed, designed, and implemented controlled blasting program is implemented, then there's no risk really, or very small risks of getting damage beyond that excavation line.
I think to be more specific, or as specific as I can get, once again, I'm nowhere near an expert on any of this, is that the young lady who spoke earlier about the collapse, part of the reason for that collapse, which is just south of here, was because the blasting was evidently not done in the right order, and it led to the collapse of the slope. So is that a danger if it's not done right? I mean, I guess everything's a danger when it's not done right, but obviously this was a construction that you would expect people to have known how to do it, and they didn't. So is this something that needs to be a concern?
We always recommended that this type of blasting be implemented on project sites, and that is something that the owner would implement, or they put into their contract documents to make sure that it's properly done and implemented.
Okay, all right. I think that's all I got.
Thank you. Young lady first, and then you, sir.
Yep, Jessica Pearson, Pearson. Good evening. Good evening, board. I'm going to speak loudly because I had a very hard time hearing back there, and I'm going to tell you that I apologize in advance if I repeat a question, because back there is very, very difficult to hear,
Okay.
including your testimony. So I apologize if I ask. So I'd like to know, how deep was the soil at the top of that ridge where you dug? And were there just soil borings at the top of that slope? Or did you go into the rock at the top of that slope? And if so, you would obviously know the depth of the sand and the dirt that I saw on your cross section.
Correct. So the
Can you
boring.
speak up? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Even though I'm right here.
Yeah, we could scroll to the boring log or the and look at that together.
That in this report, we'll both on.
Oh, it's in there. So you're going to hopefully cover the distance from the ridge and the areas at the top of that ridge where you did borings or digging or drilling. I would like to know, and then the depth of dirt. Thank you.
Page 26 on the report.
Page 26, did you say?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah, this is it right here.
Page 26.
Okay, so boring LB1, this which is shown up on the screen here.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Yeah, what we're showing on the screen is boring LB1 at the top of the slope. And it's showing the decomposed rock layers being encountered at 9 feet below ground.
I'm sorry, I'm really having trouble hearing you. Maybe he needs a new mic or something. That mic is just.
Yeah, I'll try to speak more closely into this mic. This helps. So what we're finding is in boring LB1, rock is around, decomposed rock starts around 9 feet below ground. And above that is this generally sandy material with varying amounts of gravel and silt that is all tends to be very dense to very dense.
Very dense.
Right.
So 9 feet, you said 9 feet, yeah?
Correct.
9 feet of silt and sand and some gravel before you hit rock. Did you bore into the rock as well? And if so, how deep?
So at boring E1, we cored a couple of runs into it, which is a total depth of 24 feet.
I'm sorry?
24 feet, total
You
of
went
24 feet.
into the rock.
Went from 9 feet to 24 is into rock. So the first
So
9
13.
feet is soil, right? And then the
Okay.
next 13 feet is rock.
13, he went 13 feet into the rock. And did you encounter any water table at that level?
No, there was only one test pit where water was encountered. It was around the top of rock or the top of decomposed rock.
I can't
There
understand.
was only one location. It was one of the test pits where water's encountered. Otherwise, water was not encountered.
And where was that located?
That-
If you said it, I'm sorry, I still can't hear you.
Yeah, it's not in this boring, but it was test pit. I don't know if it was test pit 1. It was also at the top of the slope, as I recall.
So how many test pits were done at the top of the ridge?
There were a total of 3 or 4 within the top of the ridge. Let me see if I can.
Okay,
Can we
and-
scroll back to the
To the map?
plan, to the map? Yeah. That was page 8 of, I think that was page 8.
How close to the edge of the ridge were each of those 4 borings? I know it sounds like boring stuff, but I think it's important to know and to get on the record. Thank you.
Well, it's in the record and it depends what you describe as the top of the ridge, but boring B1 and test pit 1 and test pit 8 on the A line are
I'm
at-
sorry.
are at the top
Can you
of
use
the
a
ridge.
pointer and show me? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm looking at this line up in here.
Yeah, which boring are we looking at?
This is LB1. This is the boring log that we were just looking at. And then these 2 test pits are also at the top of this slope.
Are each of those purple, for lack of because of my poor eyesight as well, circles, are each of those test pits or borings?
They're a combination. So TP are test pits. So this is a test pit,
Yeah,
test pit,
there's
test
no way I
pit,
could see
test
that.
pit.
Okay.
This is a boring and this is a boring.
Okay, so there were 4 made along that parallel. What is that big truncated thing going up the dead center of the page?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
The white easement, 25.
This here is a utility easement through here.
So that is below ground? Or is that at grade?
I believe that's below ground.
Does anybody know if that's at grade or below ground or?
Yeah. It's below ground. There's,
Can anyone tell me? It's on your map, so I'm wondering.
I'm sorry, I could answer. This is a below grade utility easement.
It's below grade. Do you know at what depth?
I don't know.
Okay, so you did test pits going that far away from the ridge. And I'm looking at the ridge, and if you could scroll up a little bit higher to the second parallel, no, the other way, so, yep, yes. Okay, it looks like there's some extremely steep areas coming off the ridge. And what's the distance at that sort of little point where TP7 is, test pit 7? That seems to be right at the edge, or maybe just at the edge of the ridge. Is that correct?
TP7 is on it at the edge of this relatively flat area in here. And then it drops off more steeply from this side down.
Okay, how far from the edge of that ridge, according to your drawing, would that corner of the building be? Right near test pit 7?
So this distance from here to here
Yeah,
is about 13 feet.
13. And then did you say 17 up above
I
at the other parallel? I think I heard the number 17 floated.
No, I don't recall 17. No, I didn't say 17.
So are you guys going to be putting any kind of mesh netting up to hopefully withhold some of the potential rock that might split off of the face of some of the steeper edges of the ridge?
That was not part of our conclusion. Our conclusion is that the slope is stable.
Slope is stable pre-blasted. I'm sure it is. But you are not capable of saying how it would react once the vibrations through the rock. You have not testified on that because it would be impossible for you to say because you're not there. And have you been asked to be the blaster?
No.
Are you guys doing any of the? No.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so of course you can't testify on the safety of the rock and the ridge post blasting. So perhaps the board, much in the same way that it was asked a few times, might consider a pre and post blast survey the way that the state does for a certain radius around a blast site. And that would include not just the homes that are at the bottom of that hill, as many people have concerns, but also the ridge itself, which I would think should be. Wouldn't you consider investigating that ridge and the stability of the ridge after a few months of vibrations have been run through it? After rains, as this gentleman brought up, and other conditions continue? Would that not be sensible, Mr. Chair? To condition?
I think the time now is to ask questions, and if you want to make statements.
That's not a statement, that's a question to you.
Excuse me. If you don't know the difference between a question and a statement, we can talk about that. But the question is to the expert. Now.
You
the
jump
que-
in when you want, but it's okay. I'm respectfully asking the chairman of the board a question. If
That's
you
great.
care
The
not to
time-
answer,
the
that's
time
another
now.
issue.
The time now is to ask the question of the expert. Okay,
Well, the expert's not able to answer that question.
okay.
Are you, sir?
Respectfully, it's a construction issue, Chairman Bagoff.
No,
And-
no, it's not, sir. It could be a condition of approval to ensure the safety of the
As I was
residents and
saying,
the
Chairman
safety.
Bagoff, may I?
Okay.
Well,
give me
you
one
know,
second.
now he's asking me questions.
I'm not. Mr.
I
Hess,
didn't ask her a question. Chairman.
Mr. Hess, is that something that is normally done through the engineering process when an application such as this occurs?
It's normally done prior to start of construction. There is a blasting plan that's prepared. That blasting plan lays out the monitoring that's going to occur to protect the properties.
Is there a subsequent survey done after blasting?
Not that I've ever seen.
Okay.
And again, as any condition of approval, as we've stated on the record numerous amount of times, we will follow all guidelines, protocols, regulations, and work with the town's professionals in that regard.
Thank you.
All right, so you can't, sir, the answer is you can't answer that question because we don't know how the effects of blasting might impact. And so you can't say whether it's going to be a secured ridge, cliff, face of a wall, et cetera, after blasting. You can only tell us the condition it's in today or the day that you did that report, correct?
I cannot tell you what it's going to be like after. I've only been charged with evaluating the slope stability.
Okay.
And
You can't answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Again, my name is James White. Mr. Seal, line A and line B, what is the distance between those two lines?
It's about 307.
Could you speak up, sir? into the
Oh, yeah,
microphone?
sorry. I think it's about 375 feet between.
375 feet. Okay, and there, besides, I think, LB1, there are no test bits that I can see or anything like that within that 375-foot wide area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then going long ways, how many feet are we talking about? That area from the start of, let's say, TP1 all the way to the end of line A. What is that approximate amount of distance, sir?
That's, I mean, roughly, rough numbers, 300, 325.
Can you zoom out just a little, please, of the map?
I'm sorry.
Just zoom out a little bit.
I'm sorry.
That can't be, if it's 375 feet between A and B, how can line A be 375 feet long? It looks more like it would be about 950 feet long. Is that correct? That's just my guesstimate looking at it.
I understood your first question to be what's the distance between test pit 1 and
No.
LB
My
2?
question is, what is the distance between line A and line B?
Right, that's 375 feet
Okay,
roughly.
so how long is line B approximately?
So you're right. So you're asking the length from B to B, that would be,
Yes, it's the length of B to
yeah,
B,
probably 600, 700 feet long,
at least, right?
roughly, yeah.
So how many square feet is that, sir? Of an
Square,
area that you took no tests in?
I don't know what the area is. I
Uh,
don't see that as relevant.
You don't,
We've
you don't
got-
see it relevant.
We have data that we've
Okay,
that we use to evaluate.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sir.
You're right,
Thank you.
duly noted. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have data that represents the slope at a couple locations, and it's consistent and uniform throughout.
Okay.
We-
So. Oh, thank you very much. I am quite tall. Oh, I do. So you don't find any relevance in an area that is several thousand square feet of space because you feel as if the underlying data says that whatever's between those lines should be uniform. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that for the site conditions that we have, that is generally a relatively flatter slope for the most part and steeper as you approach the top of the slope, that the conditions are relatively uniform and that our geotechnical investigation program is adequate to properly characterize the site.
Okay, and I assume that's just an algorithm-based kind of a thing that you plug in a bunch of variables and it says that the
No, that's an experience-based factor.
experience-based, so an opinion then,
Yes, a very experienced professional.
but an opinion though, right?
Sure.
Okay, good. My next questions for you is you have described this slope several different ways, which is understandable because it's a complex slope. It's not going to be any uniform amount. But I've heard you say that the ridge is 10 degrees, and I've heard you say it was 17 degrees. What my question is for you, within reason, is the sharpest points, if we zoom into the middle of the map there, the areas where you were not able to get test equipment in, which are pretty much dead center between line A and line B. What is the slope like in there, in the steepest points?
I would have to measure. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, would you say it's probably more than 20 or 25 degrees?
Again, I don't recall. I don't know what it is. We know that from on lines A and B, that as you get closer to the top, that the slope steepens to on the order of 15 to 20%. I'm sorry, degrees. And so I would say that's still an approximate reasonable range in between.
So you're saying, I may have misheard you, so I just want to make sure that I've heard you correctly. So you're saying that at no point in there is it greater than roughly 17 degrees?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in general, that it's steeper as you approach the top of the slope and much more shallow as you move away from it.
Okay. And were you able to conduct any of your testing in the absolute steepest parts of this slope that overlook people's homes?
We investigated the areas that were accessible. So I would say, looking at our map right here, we didn't take a test pit or a boring where it's too steep to get into.
Right. So your answer to my question would be no. Is that correct?
That's a fair statement. Yes.
Right. So no, you did not take any tests in the steepest parts of the hill. That is right?
That's correct.
Right. Because your equipment was not able to get into those areas in order to conduct said tests. Is that correct? That's the main reason why not?
That is, and it also doesn't represent the majority of the slope.
Okay. My question for you, do you have any experience having sort of done a post-mortem when there's been a collapse? Like, is that part of your expertise? I'm curious. Yes. Okay. And is it usually the main part of the slope that is the thing that causes the precipitating event of the collapse, or is it the aberration points as they break off, they then fall down, and then the whole thing gathers steam and causes, an avalanche?
Well, triggering events vary by their nature, often caused by water, as the main trigger of most slides.
Okay. So water causes most rock slides and avalanches, those kinds of things.
That's a major precipitating or triggering event. Yes.
Okay. And you had said that you found a water table on one of your test points. Could you tell us which one and point us with a laser where you found the water?
Could we scroll to the test pit logs? I believe it was either TP1 or TP8.
Could you just show us before, so we don't have to scroll out, just
Sure.
show us TP1
So
and
TP1 and
then we can go
TP8
back?
are on the A line at the
Okay,
top of the
They're
slope.
both right there at the absolute top of the slope.
Correct.
Okay. So the one place that you found a water table is at the absolute top of the slope. Is that correct?
Well, we're going to go, I wouldn't say it was a water table. It might have been a wet sample. It could be perched. It's most
Okay.
likely perched.
So a possible water table, we could say.
I would say localized water. If
Yeah,
there wouldn't-
maybe a water table, maybe
if
not.
there's a water table, it would be a continuum. It would be continuous throughout all the borings and test pits, and we didn't see that.
Okay, unless, it flows somewhere into that unexplored 375 foot by 700 foot area that you did not do any testing in. Is that correct? Couldn't that be possible that there's water in that area that you don't know about?
If there is water, there could, if it's a perched condition, there could be little pockets of water.
Oh, I'm sorry,
In
so sorry.
areas,
Could
yeah.
you say again? I just can't hear you.
Yeah,
I'm
if
sorry.
there's pockets of water in a perched condition, they could be in different locations. So it was test pit 1 that had water. Can I get a closer look?
Test pit 1. Okay. Can we zoom in a little bit to test point 1? That's where, no, you got to go to the left. Okay. So test pit 1, which is right smack in the middle of building D. Oh, the top third, really,
Right.
where line A
So
is, right?
Test pit 1 shows some seeping water within decomposed rock. So it could be part of it could be part of water that got in, it could be water that got into the rock and it's just seeping, it was trapped in the rock, and as we exposed it in the test pit, it seeped in.
Okay, what date was that sample taken?
This was dated November 15.
November 15th, is that correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that it had rained less than it has ever rained in the history of New Jersey for 2 months, almost immediately prior to that date?
I am aware of that.
Could that have any impact on where you found water or not?
That is possible, yes.
So it could be possible, given that you tested these things after we had the largest, longest drought that this entire area has ever seen. Are you confident that if we had had a normal amount of rain, you'd be gotten exactly the same results?
No, which is exactly why our analysis we did sensitivity on different water levels within the entire slope. We treated this entire slope as if it was saturated
Okay, but
and found it to be stable.
you stated earlier that your analysis is not necessarily an algorithm, it's based on opinions, right?
Not our stability analysis. No, our stability
Okay.
analysis is done using a computer program, limit equilibrium.
Oh, sorry, it's using,
It's using a computer program.
okay, it uses a computer program. What computer program does it use?
It's called Slope W is what we used to analyze this.
Has Slope W ever been wrong about something like this in your experience? I'm just curious.
I don't know how to answer that.
Asking you to narrow it to your experience. Has it been incorrect? Has Slope W ever been used as a tool to make these kinds of predictions on a site that has failed? That's what I'm curious of, in your knowledge.
I don't know. I don't know. of a
Okay,
case.
so not to your knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we would like to look into that. I guess the last thing is, again, you're not able to quantify what the steepest slope is, right?
I don't know as I sit here what the steepest slope is, but I could figure it out quickly if I'm allowed to take some measurements.
I'm sure you're clearly brilliant and clearly an engineer, so I'm sure you could figure that out. But again, with the dryness conditions, we're not really sure of anything that's going on in this absolutely gigantic area in the dead center of the map, but we do have, and this one is, to your statement, the opinion part of it, right, is that you're sure, because of your team's opinion and long experience, you feel confident that what's going on between A and B is utterly predictable to you. Is that right?
We feel that we're confident that the data that we have is representative of the rest of that slope, and that what we did is we analyzed these two slope sections, the different geometries of the slope sections, by varying lowering the strength of the materials and increasing the water table to analyze and assess different conditions that could play into whether there's a long-term stability issue here or
Okay.
not.
So just to be clear, if you had found water, let's say, at every one of these, it wouldn't have changed your analysis at all?
Not in the way we did the analysis. We analyzed a continuous water table at, I think it was 3 different levels. And-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
But, and the last thing was just that, again, where the steepest slopes are, you can't get equipment in to even test that because it would be too dangerous for the equipment to get into there, correct?
I don't know that that's the case, that it would be too dangerous to get in there. We just we didn't, for whatever the practical reasons might have been.
It just wasn't practical to do more testing in that area.
We just couldn't get to it, perhaps.
Is there a way that the testing could be done if there was a will to do it? Because we were concerned about that really steep area, dead center, that has not had a single test done on it, that overlooks houses. Is there a way to do it in your experience?
Yeah, potentially there's a way, depends on the site condition. We're looking at a blank map here, but in reality, it's covered with trees.
Oh, I
We
know.
could cut down a bunch of trees though, right? And that could do it?
Cut down a lot of trees and if we could get access, then we could do
I
it.
think we'd all rather not cut down a bunch of trees in our town in general, which you are planning to do anyway, but, nice joke. Okay, so there's not a practical way to actually make sure that our concerns, our collective concerns, I think I speak for other people here, regarding the safety and well-being of everyone who has to sleep at night with their children under that. There's not a practical way to get in there, except for maybe cutting down all the trees and making jokes about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think the young lady first, sir.
All right. Sorry, Rachel Klein again. I'm sorry about testifying. My question is, when did you do this site testing like you do all site testing, or is there any reason that you would look to a site as possibly even more susceptible to an issue rather than like normally, like I'm phrasing my question wrong.
In terms of slope stability, we take all sites seriously.
No,
This,
seriously.
this site itself is a relatively shallower slope than many others that I deal with. And so I still look at this as a slope of that we give due concern and consideration to, and we analyze, we get the data we need to perform the relevant analysis to give us a good understanding of the ground conditions so that's properly characterized, and then develop our findings and recommendations from that.
So the USGS, the US Geological Society, they have a map of areas that are susceptible or likely landslide sites. I think I have to pull up the exact name of the map. It's the US Landslide Inventory and Susceptibility Map. This site is in the reddest of the red on that map, which they indicate as the highest levels of susceptibility to landslides. So that's why I was asking if you treat it differently, if it's on the US, they say they use local data and county data and state data to come up with that. So knowing that the federal government's website thinks that the federal government thinks that this is a highly susceptible site to a landslide, did you treat it differently than, say, an area that's in like a more orangey site?
I look at all sites objectively, and those maps that you've just cited, they look at, it's a very broad brush mapping, and the reason they paint it red is because of the basalt rock that's prevalent along this area of the state, and it doesn't necessarily respect the site conditions, which is why we do this level of investigation to determine the strength of the soils that are present. And again, what we found is that these soils are very dense, and they're over a good quality rock. So I guess the short answer is yes, I look at all the information that's available, but I still develop our programs based on the site specifics.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me 1 second.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the interruption. I just want to make you aware. I'm having some indication that the Zoom audience, audio is fading in and out. We've had that problem last night at the council meeting. The problem originates on the Zoom platform, and I just want the Zoom audience to know that there's nothing that we can do about it here in council chambers. And once again, I apologize for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan. We'll note that for the record.
Hi there, it's Barbara White again, and now that I can see the full map, my question, just so you know, one of the biggest areas of concern as we listen to testimony has been at that upper point of Building D. That's the one that actually overlooks Howell Drive, et cetera. So with that in mind, I appreciate the fact that you were asked to take a look at this property. I'm curious about why there was no selection done at that area, which I understand is actually a very, very tight pinch point. It was 9 feet was the previous testimony. Why there as opposed, or why not a third test pit and boring at the top of that? Sure, I will. Based on the testimony of others who spoke here, there is approximately, I think, a 9-foot pinch point or so at the top of what you see there where Building D is. It was also one of the areas where people who lived on Howell raised concerns. So my question of Mr. Seal is, when choosing where the test pits were going to be done, where the borings were to be done, was there any consideration to doing the upper area? No, bring it down, the upper part of the building there. And if it was not selected, the question in my mind is why? Because of the slope lines around there.
It's blocked there.
We just want to get a better idea of the area she is speaking about and which area on the lines, just so we have a clear record and can all understand. We definitely would like to address your question.
I'm ceding to Seth because he's going to be asking part of the question. He's the realtor.
So.
Okay, push the, you're okay. You got it.
Well, I'm gonna introduce myself.
Yes, he's going to complete that because he has more information.
So if I may, Seth Weisletter.
Can you bring the mic closer to yourself?
Sure, Seth Weisletter. Do you need the address too? 17 Howell Drive. So my question is the upper corner, and I believe we can see it better, not on this map, but the report that was submitted is on page 2 of the letter that was on. If we can go to that, that would actually indicate the point that I think that we're all speaking about. It's on, so there was a letter with that map. It's on page, it's not the first letter, it's the second letter that was sent.
Summary, it's the longer report.
It's in the beginning, and there's a little map there in the middle.
Page 2.
Page 2. There it is. Yes, thank you. So if we look here, if I'm correct, sir, this is 700 feet, correct?
That's what
From
it shows.
here to here.
That's what it shows, yes.
Okay. So up here, how would you say from this corner that we're talking about, where I live over here, my neighbor's here, my other neighbor's here, how many feet is it from here to here? Roughly.
I would say roughly 200 feet.
Okay. I mean, right about 200, you said?
Correct. Yes. I'm estimating at 200. I don't have the scale.
Right. So I think the question that we're all trying to understand from Howell Drive, not representing all my neighbors, but since I'm right here, my neighbor who is here is not here this evening. We're worried about here in this slope. And in previous testimony, we talked about deer fencing being extended to protect the vegetation here. So why wasn't any testing done here? So that's, you said, that was 350 feet between that line, and now why don't we test something over here to protect this neighborhood? And why are we only protecting that neighborhood? I think that's unfair. Would you agree?
Question is, why didn't they test there?
Correct. Why are we focused on this neighborhood and not that neighborhood? In previous testimony, this is an important area that affects this neighborhood, as indicated by deer fencing that was proposed to be extended, and there was no slope testing done. And the residents there are, and myself as a resident, is highly concerned. So I'd like to understand why this area was not taken into consideration.
And at the time we were asked to look at this, our understanding or interpretation is that is what we is in the area that we show in our report.
Okay, so you were not asked at all to include the area that was, is
I
that we.
won't say we weren't asked. I'm just saying our understanding of what the concern was the further slope.
So in your professional opinion, would you think that slope would be important when we get to blasting, being that the building is closer here than it is here? We're talking 200 feet, 300 feet to these homes. Would you think that that would be important to test?
Well, I don't.
Yes or no, please.
Yeah, I don't know that there's rock to blast at the north end of the building, sir.
I'm sorry, I said.
I don't believe there's rock to be. I don't believe there's rock to be excavated at that north end of the building. From what I recall, that it's that end of the building is bearing on soils.
So there's no rock here, but there's rock over here? I'm not understanding.
There was borings that were done by another engineer within the building, and rock, as I recall, that was 6 to 8 feet deep. But I what I recall is that that end of the building is at an it steps down as you go from north to south. So I don't believe that there was rock intended to be excavated at that north end of the building.
So if, again, I was not here for your whole complete testimony. My apologies if I sound repetitive. But this was to wherever we're blasting to see the effect on the slope and to understand what could potentially happen or not happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, in general, that's correct, is to understand how the construction of the building affects the slope.
So couldn't blasting over here affect other parts of the slope that are closer than 700 feet away? I mean, even if we came from this point to those homes, that's approximately, how far would you say that would be? If I took that line and turned it, I think we're about 700 feet more, about. Would you agree?
I would, yeah, perhaps less, 600.
Right, so could blasting have an effect on the slope here in the neighborhood here? Yes or no?
Well, again, I don't control the blasting, but if controlled blasting methods were utilized, then I would expect there to be no impacts from it.
I'm sorry, can you?
I said, I'm not involved in the blasting. My recommendation is that if blasting is done, that they use control techniques to prevent any damage to any adjacent structures.
So would you suggest that this area of the slope be tested, given that could be 350 feet? So we have 353, 300, and then over here as well to mitigate any possible issues?
Yeah,
Would you recommend that as a professional?
We don't have data up there, so if that's a concern in the area, then additional borings could be done to evaluate that stability.
I think the point's made. There's no data. There's no sense what could happen to that neighborhood. Thank you.
You should never give me this. Hi, just a couple of points of clarification due to some of the other questions that came out since I was last here. So did you say, sir, that the portion of the building that's 200 plus feet away from that neighborhood at the top of the map will not be secured to anything but soil? Did you say that it's not
I'm
going to
not-
be
I'm-
blasted or anchored in? It's just going to be on the soil? Is that what you said?
No, that's not what I said.
What
I
did
said
you
it's,
say?
first of all, I'm not the geotechnical engineer of record for the building. I don't. so
I know, but
don't-
you
What I,
testified on
what I
something.
understand is that that part of the building is going to bear on soil.
It's not going to be anchored into from your understanding, it's not going to be anchored into, do you know how
It's
thick the
not
soil
gonna-
is
it's-
there? No,
it's
you
not-
didn't do borings.
It's not going to, my understanding is that that end of the building is going to bear on soil, not rock.
Gonna be on the soil. Is there a reason that you chose those two particular parallels over anywhere else on that mesa? I don't know, what's it called?
I'm sorry, you're referring to the lines A and B.
I am referring to the parallels at which they dug test pits or bore soil borings. So you've chosen two parallels out of that entire, I don't know how many linear feet that we're talking, that building extends at the edge of that cliff.
It's common practice for geotechnical engineers to choose.
Can't understand.
It's common practice for geotechnical engineers to determine the density and strength of materials along parallels down a slope and when you're evaluating slope stability. So the reason that these different points are aligned is because of that. So that's what, so that.
Did you make a statement earlier that there were areas that were just so steep that you couldn't do those borings?
I did not say that, no. I said we use a combination of assessment in the field for accessibility. If there's a certain density of trees, or if there's a certain area that we can't get around for whatever reason, we are targeting areas that are more or less aligned so that we can get data for use in our stability analysis. And that tends to be oriented perpendicular to the slope in a more or less linear arrangement. That's why you see the borings and test pits aligned along or clustered along two relatively straight lines.
Okay, but there was no reason in particular that you chose those two parallels across the site, other than they just were convenient and accessible?
No, I testified earlier that at least in one case, the line to the south, that we did want to get as close to that taller cropping where that turn in the building is closest to the edge of that steeper part of the slope.
I'm not sure that really made that much sense to me. I kind of didn't really get good reasoning out of that, but if that's your answer, then so be it. It didn't actually explain why you chose those two areas to my mind. What happens to that 25, that massive sewer line, that easement that runs through, if that somehow, now that runs through the entirety of the property, as you can see. It's a massive sewer line. It goes up onto Howell. And my understanding is that it currently has some leaks. And it is sewage. It is raw sewage.
I'm sorry, he didn't testify to the sewer line.
Sir, it's on his map. I'm asking him about it, so please allow me to finish. It's on his map.
There are many things on the map. You have to focus on the testimony and the report, please.
Sir, it's on his map. I'm asking him a question about something that
If
is
he
on
can't
his map.
answer if he can, if he can't answer, he won't.
For the record, Chairman Bagoff, the underlying map is part of the site plan set that was submitted by our civil engineer.
All right, well, he's a geotechnical.
I need to finish. That was not, the underlying map was not prepared by the witness here. I guess it's fair to say that the color notations and the sites, the locations of the test pits and the borings, you added to that map, but you did not draw the underlying map. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We put our borings as an overlay.
Did you put that existing sewer easement lettering there and that arrow? Is that what did you draw that on there? Existing?
Yes, anything in red or blue is what we added to the map.
Okay, so as a professional geotechnical engineer, what is your opinion of what happens to a line that may undergo, I think it's not a brand new sewer line, mind you, that may undergo a great deal of vibration? What would your, it would all be conjecture on your part, right? Just like you don't know how the wall's going to react. The slopes are going to react after blasting.
So, right. So as I understand your question, it's related to how that might behave after blasting. You're correct. I can't speak to that.
No. That's all I got.
Thank you. Do any of them come right up, sir?
Very brief question. Could I have the laser pointer, please? Sorry, I'm colorblind as heck. This one, okay. So line A on your other map is approximately here, is that correct?
Yeah, roughly in
And
that.
line B is approximately here, correct?
Correct.
And this is the area which I figured out is something like 500,000 square feet within, you did not check. But this here, this slope, did you take any measurements of what the steepness of this slope up here is?
No, we didn't,
There were no measurements taken of the,
well, we didn't do any borings
Of the grade, okay.
correct, we didn't do any borings.
the reason why I ask is, first of all, the distance from this corner to this house, I'm pretty good geometrically speaking, is somewhere between 150 and 200 200 feet. Which is
Sir,
not very far.
again, we're testifying. You can ask
Sir,
him if he knows.
Mr. Bagoff, he will be able to answer my question. Please allow me to finish my question. It is
But
germane to
you're
the point.
adding in, let me just explain. 1 second. You're adding information that is not evident from.
Sir, Mr. Bagoff, the reason why I'm interrupting you is because you were incorrect. There is, on the map in front of us, is a line from this point to this point, which shows to be 750 feet. In the middle of that 700 feet would be 350 feet, giving us a line this long. We can take from the map, which is part of the testimony, that line and superimpose it in our minds from this point to this point, and we'd be all the way over here. So being that this map is part of the testimony, it is fair game for me to ask questions about it, even though his expertise is safety and the building and the installation, all the grading, all that. The question I was going to ask before you interrupted me is directly related to his expertise. It won't be about the floodplain. It won't be about some other analysis he hasn't made. It's a question that I think is fair game. So may I finish?
May I answer your statement?
Yes.
He has to be able to measure that. You're testifying, you put on the record a certain amount of feet.
Sure. Struck that from the record. Sir,
Okay, and
with-
so you may ask him a question about a distance if he knows it. That's fair game.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Mr. Seal, do you see the line here marked as oops, I think I hit the wrong button here. The line marked as 700 feet.
Yes,
Would you be able to make a mental estimate of approximately 1/2 of that line?
yes,
Okay, and would you be able to superimpose that line from this corner right here to this area? Can you take a moment and do that with your mind, sir?
yes.
Okay. Would you tell me, in your opinion, based upon this map right here, how far, taking a second to really look at it, from this corner to this backyard would be?
So from the corner of the building to
The
the,
very corner of the building to where these people live on Howard.
so if you pick a point,
This point to this point.
I would say roughly 150 to 175 feet.
Right, roughly 150, 175 feet. So based on this map right here, does this look like this is a 17-degree slope to you based upon looking at this map?
I can't answer it that quickly. I'd really have to measure.
Okay, well, I'm not allowed to testify about the fact that it is not physically possible for me to walk down that, so I won't make that testimony, but I will ask you that, or I just want to know why no analysis was done in this particular area, given the proximity of this corner to where people actually live and how steep, at least to this map, to my eyes, it appears that this slope might be. I'm wondering why analysis was only performed along this lateral here and this lateral here. Why was there no analysis of this area?
Well, I believe I already testified to that, but I'll perhaps my voice was low.
Probably, sorry.
That's okay. At the time that we performed this work, it was our understanding that the main concern here had to do more with related to rock excavation and slope stability and in general construction of that building. So our focus area was in the area that we investigated.
Okay, pardon my ignorance, but who's concerned? The person contracting you or the concerns of the board here, the people?
What we understood as the concerns from this room.
From
Concerns from this room.
this room?
Correct.
Okay. So if this area has never been brought up as a possible, to your knowledge, as a possible, area for a landslide or anything like that?
And not to my
Not
knowledge.
to your knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, the last question I'll ask you, given your breadth of experience, do you think it would be appropriate to do some exhaustive testing in this area, given the proximity of the corner of this building to where people's families sleep. Do you think that it may be a good idea to actually do some testing in this area? Especially if, and this is an if this grade is considerably steeper than anything over here.
It would be certainly something that that we would look at.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
May I ask? Okay. Patrick Laterza again, Laterza. I'm sorry, I have more measurement questions for you. Can we switch over to like the main one with all the test pits and everything in it? Sorry, I'll try. Yeah, please. Thank you. Mr. Seal, do you have an idea or could give us because there's no legend on this map or whatever, what the distance between TP2 and TP3 is?
So here's TP2 and TP3.
Yeah.
And your question is the distance?
Correct.
No, let's see if we can zoom out. Actually. So I guess zoom out so I can see that. In rough numbers, I'd say 100 feet or so. 7,500 feet.
Okay. And how about, sorry, LB4 to TP6, it's down and to the right.
LB. Oh, this one here. No, it's LB4 to TP6. So yeah. Again, maybe 50 to 75 feet. I can't really tell the scale on this from as it's zoomed in. Yeah. Yeah, if we can zoom out again so I can get a better sense of the scale, but it looks like maybe 70, 50, 75 feet.
If we use those approximations, could we calculate what the actual slope is on this slope? Because I think that's where we're getting to. You said 17 earlier to my question about slope on these lines, and those areas are nowhere close to 17 based off of my math. If, you know, I know we're using approximations here, but I'm getting in the 20s and 30s for slope.
Percent or degrees?
Degrees.
Well, I'd suggest if we're gonna, if we want to know precisely what every section of line is, we can do that, but I need time to sit with a scale and
A calculator, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just, would it be possible to say that it's not 17 degrees in those areas? That perhaps 17 degrees might be the entire run, and as you lengthen it out, yes, your slope gets less. But in these areas that are very close to the building,
varies,
it's
but
much higher.
It varies. I know, but it varies. But we do, when we look at the length along the entire line, it's closer to, again, roughly, these rough numbers, 10 degrees.
Across the
overall,
entire line,
across
that whole distance of
well,
A?
if you measure from the very far left to the far right, which, and it admittedly, the slope varies as you navigate from one section to another. So it is going to vary. There are going to be steeper sections. That's what the contours show.
Well, you know, I mean, from my perspective, then, you know, the longer you elongate that line, the lower the slope is going to get, correct?
That's correct.
So I think we're all concerned about where the a lot of that is very steep, just looking at these lines. You know, especially in the areas where.
Yeah.
From where
I
you-
understand that, but I think if just to help allay some concerns, when we do our slope stability analysis, we're using the actual topography along these lines. So regardless of what I'm saying is an overall slope might be, we're looking at the surfaces from one end to the other along that entire line. So that's factored into the slope stability analysis.
I know, but I think our concern in response to your testimony is you're stating that the building is being built on a slope of, at the top that's 10 some odd degrees, and that the overall slope is 17. But wouldn't it be safe to say that that's using the very long elongated area that you're looking at on line A or line B, as opposed to looking at the steeper portions of the slope, which are significantly steeper than 17 degrees?
Well, I said my testimony was that on approximate numbers, from one end to the other, it's on the order of 10 degrees, not the other way around. But you're correct, it is steeper, but our analysis accounts for that. And it varies dramatically. So it's, from a conversational perspective, it's difficult to try to describe that in testimony. But the fact is, our analysis utilizes the actual topography to describe the stability of the slope. So it factors in all these nuances that you're describing. You're saying, yes, it's steeper in one section, it flattens out, it gets steeper again. All that topography is embedded in our slope stability analysis.
Okay, but I just want to go back to the fact that right after, just to ask the question again, right after sort of the ridge line, quote unquote, it is significantly steeper than 17 degrees, correct? I know you don't have a calculator in front of you, but yeah, I think a certain assertion could be made here.
Yeah, I would say in certain sections, it could certainly be steeper than that, but I can't tell you specifically what they are. I know when I measured one particular section, it was 17 degrees. I can't tell you what every section is, and some may be steeper, some are going to be shallower.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Hi, Victor Massardi. Again, Joe, can you zoom in again, those last two that he was just referring to? Yeah, those two. I just want to say that it says, I'm sorry, it says right there, 528 elevation, that's above sea level, and 584. So that's 56 feet. And if you estimate between LB4 and TP6 as being 50 feet, and that's just a guess, but it says the vertical height is absolutely 56. So 50 feet horizontally, 50 feet vertically, that's a 45-degree slope. You know, it's as wide as it is tall, so 45 degrees. And that looks like about the steepest, you know, but I mean, there are other areas that are that steep, but I mean, certainly not 10 or 17%. I mean, that's my question.
Yeah, again, my testimony is wasn't to dissect every section of the slope, just gives generalities, because our slope stability analysis utilizes the steepness along and flatness along the sections given. And I don't know what the precise horizontal distance is, for example, between LB4 and TP6, but your logic is correct. If we look at the rise over the run on that tells us what that slope is. I just don't know what the horizontal distance is on.
Yeah,
on
the
this.
horizontal is a guess, but the vertical is given from those
Correct.
numbers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public have any questions for Mr. Seal on his testimony? Seeing none, we're closing that part of the meeting. Thank you, sir. We're going to take a 5-minute bio break off the record.
You got a lot.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. Mr. Plucker.
Thank you, Chairman Banagoff. The applicant would like to call our professional planner, John McDonough.
Seems to work better. Brian, you should let him use your microphone. It might work.
You want to swear
better.
me?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 minute.
Okay, do you have the right, correct
Yes.
microphone? Are you switching? Is that what's going?
Can you hear me?
Yes, they're
We're
saying that.
switching microphones. Maybe it'll be
That
better
might be helpful.
reception.
Okay. Would you just give us your name, your full name, John?
Sure. Hi there, everyone. My name is John McDonough. That's spelled MC, capital DONOUGH.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
For the record, my name is John McDonough. I am a licensed professional planner here in the state of New Jersey. That license is current. It's in good standing. This is what I do on a nightly basis throughout the state of New Jersey. I'm also a member of the AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. That's our national certification. Again, both current and in good standing. I do this on a nightly basis, and I've been here in this great community many, many times.
Okay. Does any member of the board have any questions about Mr. McDonough and his licensure? No, we accept you as a professional planner in the state of New Jersey, sir. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
John, the application seeks one bulk variance and two exception requests from the RSIS standards. Please give your overview of the project proposed as a planner and address those three items as part of this testimony.
Sure. So from a planning standpoint, we conducted what would be a customary planning analysis in support of the application. There are 4 parts to our analysis. First part, we look at existing conditions. Second, we look at the proposed conditions. Third, we look at the applicable zoning and how the particular development stacks up with the zoning criteria that are articulated in your regulations. And then finally, again, to the extent that the applicant is seeking relief, we do have some relief sought here. We look at the statutory criteria, which have been well established by our municipal land use law in existence since 1975. So taking you through the 4 parts. Part number 1, it's been well established here that we're dealing with a single tax lot, block 179, lot 32. Approximately 120 acres of vacant land. The surrounding lands, as you've seen during the course of 7 hearings now, this being the 8th hearing, is all surrounded by development, predominantly residential development. Part number 2, we look at what's proposed. The plan here, as you've heard, is for in what we call an inclusionary housing development in accordance with the town's fair share plan, your housing element and fair share plan, and the court settlement. There are 496 units proposed here with a 20% affordable set aside that will contribute to the town's regional obligation to provide for its fair share of affordable housing. That equates to 100 units in 4 buildings, as you heard through the testimony of the witnesses extensively before me. And over 90 acres of preserved land as part of this development. Part number 3, we look at the zoning considerations, and we are here in the IH1 Inclusionary Housing District, a zone that is specifically aimed at producing affordable housing. It comes on the heels of your 2019 master plan update and reexamination report, which continues to call out as a core goal of the community to provide for fair share housing
and decent housing for people of all income levels. Quoting from the master plan, in general, in terms of general housing obligations, West Orange remains committed to addressing its quote, fair share of regional affordable housing needs, as well as providing a range of housing opportunities. Again, this also comes on the heels of our Fair Housing Act and the statewide obligation to provide fair share housing and affordable housing for persons of low and moderate income. Not only does this come on the heels of your 2019 master plan, you followed that up with a 2020 fair share element and housing element as well, which specifically references this site on page number 9 and specifically references this development, quoting again, West Essex Highlands, Block 179, Lot 32, will contain 496 family residential units, including 100 affordable family units or rental units. Again, that was part of a court settlement with the Fair Share Housing Advocacy Group. Again, that avoids a potential challenge under a builder's remedy and gives the community immunity from a developer's challenge for failing to meet your fair share obligation. This is one of multiple sites that, again, the town is being proactive in meeting its fair share obligation. So compliments to the community, your leadership, this board, all with the foresight to see that you have a responsibility to provide for your fair share housing obligation. This is a third round project. You actually are now facing the fourth round coming at you next, as all municipalities are. 80,000, actually more than 80,000 affordable housing units are mandated by the DCA as part of the numbers that came out in October to provide a realistic opportunity statewide for 80,000 affordable housing units by 2035. That's 10 years starting in 2025. Your town is getting hit with an obligation as well in the fourth round. 660 units is what I'm seeing as part of the DCA numbers. Again, this is a third round obligation. So this is looking at your prior obligation. The zone, again, is specifically aimed at providing affordable housing as part of your fair share plan. The planning board has taken all the proper steps procedurally in implementing this plan. Most importantly, finding that the fair share element or the housing element of your plan is substantially consistent with your master plan as well. So there's a whole series of layers of connectivity here from a public policy standpoint that links together in the implementation of this particular plan. My role as the planner is relatively limited to focus, and the board has a similar responsibility here, to focus on the applications conforming with the zoning regulations that are before you. There's very strict case law, very solid case law that comes from the Supreme Court in the Pizzo-Manton case that says the essence of good planning is rooted in your zoning ordinance. If an application complies with your ordinance, it should be approved. We've got a project here that is substantially in compliance with the zoning regulations that are before you. All of the highest tiers of your IH1 zone district are met, particularly your use controls in terms of providing for multifamily residential and open space. And then, of course, your most important bulk controls are met here as well. The project density conforms. Project height conforms. The number of stories conforms. The coverage, building coverage, lot coverage conforms. Setbacks on all sides, front, side, rear, other side, all conform. The parking fully conforms. The buffers on all sides fully conform. The landscaping details housing zone district. Not to the building per se, but to the grading around the building. It's in a grading section of your ordinance. You heard testimony through Mr. Anderson, through Mr. Appel as well, that the applicant is asking the board to move on having greater than 50% exposure of the building foundations based on the grading, again, in the interest of minimizing disturbance on the property. And we've heard this over and over again. It goes back to the settlement agreement as well, to minimize disturbance on the property, to provide for a clustered development as opposed to a sprawling development over the entirety of the land, and maintaining significant green space on the property. Mitigative measures with respect to that wall exposure. And just for the record, again, citing Mr. Appel's testimony, you've got 4 buildings here. Building A exposes 76.5%, Building B 76.4%, Building C 69.1%, and Building D 54.8%, whereby 50% would be the maximum that's allowed. Again, all in the response to the sloping terrain, the highly irregular terrain that we're dealing with on this rugged piece of property, and mitigated by substantial vegetation. You heard a lot about that green wall. This is not going to be a plastic green wall. This is going to be a living green wall, actual plantings, foundation plantings, and trees as well to mitigate exposure, which is really internal to the development, not external to the development, and certainly remote from those homes that are around it. Mitigated and obscured by the trees and the buffering that will remain between the subject and the neighboring properties. Again, we're looking at mitigative measures and all being done in the interest of minimizing land disturbance. In consideration of the C relief that the applicant is seeking, and again, it's just that one variance, which really has an aesthetic component, more so than a functional or a life safety component to it. We look at what we call the flexible C balancing test, and we consider the application as a whole. We have good case law on that as well that says, look at the entire package and the good that it does. We counterbalance that with the relief that the applicant is seeking. Given that adherence to the higher zone controls, and this relatively modest design relief that the applicant is asking the board to move on. Again, remember the little blue slivers that Mr. Appel showed in his exhibit A3 back in August. I think clearly the board can find that relief can be granted without any substantially adverse visual impacts by having that exposed building foundation and the relief that's being sought. On the positive side, we consider the benefits of the application as a whole. Paramount to this application is the public interest, the court-mandated provision for affordable housing. These are the words of the New Jersey Supreme Court, going all the way back to Mount Laurel #1. These are not John McDonough's words. These are the New Jersey Supreme Court, which formed the whole impetus of why we have affordable housing here in New Jersey. And this was brought on again by that 1975 case, NAACP versus the Township of Mount Laurel, where the courts found that there was exclusionary zoning in Mount Laurel and opened the doors, if you will, for the provision of affordable housing and obligation to all towns. This is what the court said, quote, "There is not the slightest doubt that New Jersey has been and continues to be faced with a desperate need for housing, especially of decent living accommodations economically suitable for low and moderate income families. This situation is categorized as a crisis." That's the preamble to the Mount Laurel Doctrine, which has now been reaffirmed since 1975 through Mount Laurel 2, Mount Laurel 3, and here we sit now with Mount Laurel 4 again. So what's happening here in West Orange is happening throughout New Jersey as well. And again, I compliment the community and the leadership for responding to the law. This is not the town per se driving this, but the law that's driving this, and what our courts are mandating. The project not only provides affordable housing, which we just said is of paramount public interest. We have new housing stock. We have attractive new buildings. We've got abundant, robust landscaping. This project has been well designed. It has been well laid out. You have testimony, unwavering testimony that this project will flow, will function, will operate safely, conveniently, and comfortably for the people that live here, and will integrate with the land that is around it. The project will promote compact development, efficient land use, and economy of scale, which is what we see in multifamily developments, clustered development, as opposed to sprawling single-family development. The project promotes a variety of land uses in appropriate locations, again, with what is a fully permitted use in this zone. The project promotes environmental preservation by preserving over 90 acres of woodlands. We always have to take this back to our land use law, NJSA 40:55D-2, which is what gives this community the right to create zone districts and essentially create this board and your zoning board as well, and govern what happens from a land use perspective within the proper of your community. Fundamental purposes in the land use law, there are about 18 or so of them. It's an obligation of an applicant to prove that one are met. I actually see multiple here based on the benefits that I just quoted, including purpose A, the promotion of the general welfare. Purpose G, again, the planning goal for variety. Purpose I, for promotion of a desirable visual environment. And purpose M, efficient use of land. Counterbalancing that with the negative criteria. Based on all the testimony and the credible evidence, relief can be granted without any substantially adverse impacts. You have good, solid testimony from Mr. Anderson, and also 60, 70 pages of detailed site plans that demonstrate this is a well thought out plan designed in accordance with sound site planning principles. Likewise, you have a set of plans and testimony from Mr. Appel that this has been designed in accordance with all applicable building codes, UHAC, and other life safety codes as well. You have testimony through your own environmental expert that there will not be any substantially adverse environmental impacts. Testimony from Mr. Penke that there will not be any substantially adverse traffic impacts. And again, you have testimony through an expert in geotechnical that there will not be any substantially adverse geotechnical impacts associated with this development. Again, this is uncontroverted expert opinion that, as I stand now, I think strongly goes towards the resolution of the negative criteria. And the applicant has certainly met its burden through continued probing, which I think is certainly appropriate. Very, very detailed, good questions, and a responsive applicant in the form of its professionals here. So the process has been interactive, which again is exactly what Pizzo Manton says the process should be. It should be done in a public forum with the public, and questions are posed, questions are answered. Where we've landed now after, I'll say, 8 hearings, testimony on the record is clear that this project will not have any substantially adverse impacts. And lastly, of course, I'm going to take you back to that Pizzo Manton case, which I can tell you, I actually lived that case. It was up in Randolph. It involved a 90-acre virgin piece of land as well, a woodland, where the applicant was proposing a residential development. We went through multiple hearings, many, many hearings, public, very similar process to what has happened here. At the end of the day, the board actually denied the application on the grounds that it did not constitute quote unquote good planning. It went through the courts and it landed with the Supreme Court that, again, taking you back to what I said at the outset, ruled that the essence of good planning, quote unquote, is rooted in your zoning ordinance. Where an application complies, it is consistent with good planning, and in that regard should be approved. It is not up to the discretion of the board, the public, to say what does or doesn't constitute good planning. You have evidence here, you have conformance with the zone ordinance. which is particularly set up to safeguard the public interest. So again, we have two cases here that are fundamental tenets to the application before you. The Mount Laurel Doctrine and the Pizzo-Manton case as well, which will give the board, I think, the good legal framework to guide your decision-making here. I am not a lawyer, I'm a planner. We have to operate in a legal framework. And so I give those, I certainly take those cases into consideration, and I give it to the board as well. On balancing, I think the Clearway here lands on the positive, substantially outweighs any detriments associated with those slivers of wall exposure, and clearly a better zoning alternative. It sounds like it is potentially feasible to eliminate that relief, but then you would get retaining walls, you'll get more land disturbance, more tree removal. The board is supposed to consider whether it represents a better zoning alternative, and for all of those reasons, I believe that the evidence proves that this is a better zoning alternative. Now, you did hear testimony outside of variance relief. There are two de minimis exceptions which come from, again, state regulation, the residential site improvement standards, or I'll call them RSIS for the purpose of my testimony, really falling back on Mr. Pankey's testimony, to a certain extent, Mr. Anderson as well. We have here relief related to the fact that the loop road with the closing off of Cusick, which comes as a part of that settlement agreement with the neighbors there, would create a loop that has a greater than 1,000 average daily traffic rate, greater than 1,000 average daily traffic. I think through the testimony, it was 1,784 trips above that threshold. Mr. Pankey, again, I'm not a traffic engineer, has addressed that through his testimony as the predicate for my planning conclusion that the site has adequate carrying capacity and can function safely and efficiently without any substantially adverse degradation of traffic or unsafe conditions, to have Cusick Road closed off as part of the court settlement in the interest of protecting the privacy of the neighbors, but for emergency access. Likewise, there was testimony that came on during the course of the hearing about having a sidewalk only on one side from the interior circle, working your way back down to Warner. It's only a piece of the overall development. And again, I think the board can find that relief is also justifiable in meeting the intent and purpose of the RSIS. Whenever we look at relief related to the RSIS, there are certain words that we need to speak to. First, the literal enforcement of one or more provisions of the standards is impracticable or will exact undue hardship because of peculiar conditions pertaining to the development in question. Again, given all the testimony on the record, strict or literal enforcement is impracticable and serves no practical planning purpose. In terms of the access, adequate access is provided and relief responds to the neighbor's request to close off Cusick. Relief relates to a hardship created by the land and the surrounding road network already in place. You heard that sidewalk on the one side is going to provide for safe and adequate pedestrian circulation. There are no homes along that stretch of roadway, so the single walkway would nicely tie into what we see on the Warner side. Additionally, the RSIS purposes advanced here to eliminate unnecessary increases in the cost of housing that are non-commensurate with the protection of public health and safety, to provide for residential projects that are based upon sound, objective site improvement standards rather than upon discretionary design standards, to provide the widest possible range of design freedom and promote diversity through performance-oriented site improvement standards. And then finally, to separate the policy-making aspects of development review from the making of technical determinations. During the course of the hearings, again, we found that the applicant is advancing the laudable goals and policies of your community to advance your complete street policy. This circulation system is going to be bicycle-friendly and pedestrian friendly. And I think that goes towards the spirit of the RSIS and justifies those de minimis exceptions as well. All said, you've heard a lot of testimony. It's the predicate for my generally narrow conclusion here that this application is the culmination of a long court settlement. I've been involved with this property for many, many years, and this is in accordance with a fair share plan. Most importantly, for the board to consider the statutory criteria for the relief that the applicant is making or met, and approval is warranted here. That's all I have on direct, unless there's redirect.
No, I don't have any redirect, so I would have Chairman open up to the board for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Cardoza, do you have any questions for Mr. McDonough on his testimony?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mayor McCartney, do you have any questions? Vice Chairman Garino, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Alpert, do you have any questions for Mr. McDonough's testimony?
If, it's been a while since I've seen it, and I don't know that I need to see it, but it occurred to me, if Cusick is closed to vehicle traffic and is only left for emergency access, would keeping it open for bicycles and pedestrians be feasible at all? And if so, would that be something that could be conditioned or agreed to? Again, it's been so long since I've seen it, I don't remember if it is feasible, but it occurred to me to ask.
Yes.
The applicant will make the representation. We believe that it is generally feasible, and if it is, we would be able to do that.
Okay.
Yes, it's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If it is.
Mr. Wilks, do you have any questions for Mr. McDonough's testimony?
No questions.
Thank you. Councilperson Scarpa, do you have any questions for Mr.
No.
McDonough? Mr. Hess, do you have any questions? Mr. Hazel, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. John, in terms of the stipulation of the exposure of the foundation, what, in your opinion, is the intent of that stipulation?
I agree with, I think, what you said, Mr. Hazel, and I think other board members said as well back at that August hearing. It's primarily aesthetic, not functional per se, not a safety control, but generally to avoid having foundations, I'll say, or the lower levels of the building overpower the overall development. Given all the mitigative measures here and those visuals support that conclusion, I think that planning intent is clearly met here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do any members of the public have any questions for Mr. McDonough's testimony? Please come up, state your name.
For the benefit of those in the Zoom audience, we are aware that the Zoom audio may be fading in and out. We apologize for this inconvenience. Please bear with us. We are working with Zoom to correct the issue.
Hey, hi.
Hi there.
Victor Massardi. Thank you. Everyone in the room can hear you. It was loud and fantastic. Right?
I'll run with that.
Everyone. Okay, so I have two questions. My first question is, you covered, very well how it meets the zoning, it meets fair share, the proposed development, meets, ADA, et cetera. I see I'd like your opinion on two areas which I don't think comply with regulations. And I'd like your answer. So one is traffic. We had a traffic expert testify, and you refer to that, that we have over 1,000 cars a day, going through one access road. We're going on to Eagle Rock Avenue, which is going to be a problem. We have right there at Laurel Avenue traffic light, which is going to be a conflict with these two turning and et cetera. So as a planner, I think it's a fair question, right? Like, for the public good, et cetera, don't you see that as, how do you see it?
Are you talking about the sheer volume of traffic?
The whole traffic picture, yes.
I think I can conclude that the traffic picture has been well thought out by experienced professionals who have done a lot of applications and looked at a lot of traffic conditions. You have solid testimony from Mr. Pankey, sworn under oath that the project will, again, not create a substantially adverse traffic impact. So that's on the record.
Okay, and you would just agree with that? You would agree?
I can't dispute it. I'm not a traffic expert, and I have not heard any expert opinion that would contravene or contradict that.
Okay. All right. And my second question, it doesn't seem like this proposed development complies with DEP regulations. I think there was an agreement where they did not have to meet, the development would not have to meet the latest DEP stormwater, stream encroachment, buffer zones, how much water is retained on the site. So again, as a planner, I mean, what's your opinion? Do you think it, I mean, if it's not meeting the newest regulations, like, it seems like it's not meeting. Okay, you didn't hear, repeat the question?
No, I believe that the gentleman is asking about not complying with certain DEP regulations. It was testified as to what set of DEP storm regulations apply. That was agreed to by the DEP itself. And as we've stated on the record before, and as I believe the township has, we did obtain all our required DEP permits. I understand there are a group or two who want to try to change the DEP's mind, and that's fine. That's not within the purview of
I guess just my question was, as a planner, looking at the public good, you know, it's all right with you. It's, you know, that we're not meeting the latest regulations, we're meeting older.
He's not gonna, he didn't testify. He didn't testify to that, sir.
Okay.
He didn't testify to that, nor is he going to testify to that.
Okay,
Okay?
so
Thank
he's
you.
not involved. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel Klein. So when you looked at the site as a planner, you pretty much stopped at Warner and Oval, or you looked at everything as had been done in the past when this area, you said you've been very familiar with the site for a long time. Most other times the site tries to be developed, they've looked at everything. But it sounded like you stopped kind of where Warner and Oval began. And then that was it. You didn't go from Warner to Eagle Rock. Is that true? For, like you said, the traffic expert testified, but he stopped at Warner and Oval. He didn't look at Oval to Eagle Rock.
I just don't think it's a fair question because I believe that the traffic professional, Ms. Cohen.
Yeah.
I believe he did testify to that, and he did testify as to the nature
No, he's
of the county improvements, including the traffic signal installation at the corner of Eagle Rock and Oval. And I believe he testified how that would interplay with Laurel as well. And I know the other gentleman mentioned those intersections. So our professionals definitely did address traffic with regard to those roads.
not where Rapley joins Oval and more houses empty onto the same road, but other planners had looked at that in the past, and that's leads to my next question. In your professional assessment, this is a safe, great project, looks wonderful, Mount Laurel housing is going to be met, but why was it that this magical Mount Laurel housing made what had been deemed unsafe for 136 single-family homes is now suddenly safe for almost 500 homes?
Two totally distinct projects. Single-family housing is notorious for sprawl, for disturbance, for land disturbance. One of the fundamental principles of this application was to have compact development and again, preserve over 90 acres of trees. That was not part of the.
I think you misunderstood my question. The town planner had deemed this unsafe for 136 family homes based on traffic alone. And the areas where the traffic meets has really not changed, except that they've added Howell Drive as a possible egress for emergencies only. So that was my.
First of all, I'm not aware of the prior planner saying that 136 units was unsafe from a traffic standpoint. I'm looking at the application now, and uncontroverted expert opinion from a traffic engineer that the development before you will not be unsafe from a traffic standpoint.
From Warner to Oval.
Based on a standard traffic impact analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public please come up and state your name?
Good evening. My name is Edward Davis. I'm the mayor of Essex Fells. Apologize for my casual attire. I wasn't expecting to speak tonight, but thank you for your testimony. I just have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned a court case where I think your description of it was the court ruled, and you apparently agree, that if a development is consistent with the zone or the zoning ordinance, it is by definition sound planning. Do I have that right? Is that what you said?
That's the gist, yes.
Okay, so the zoning ordinance on this particular lot has changed over time, correct? In West Orange?
Yes, zoning evolves. Land use does not stand still.
Okay, so in the zoning ordinance that applied, I think it was 6 years ago, predated the current zone. You're saying by definition that was sound at the time, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now a drastic change in terms of multifamily home, what's allowed in the zone, drastic change in roughly 2020. That is also sound, even though it's vastly different than what preceded it.
Planning is all about balance. There were a significant change circumstances with round three, court mandated obligations. Certainly, environmental protection is one of the considerations, but affordable housing is another force that has influence on this town. So yes, that is a clear cut and conventional reason why a zoning would change. We see it throughout New Jersey.
Right, but you're not testifying to the board and giving your expert opinion on Mount Laurel. You're not a lawyer, right?
I am not a lawyer.
So you're a planner. So you're doing some independent analysis consistent with sound planning principles outside of just looking at the zone, looking at Mount Laurel, et cetera, correct?
All I can tell you is I've lived that Randolph case. It had a lot of parallels to what we're seeing here. A public that clearly did not like the application, move the road, move this, move that. Eventually, the applicant threw up his hands and said, I can't. I comply with the ordinance. And then it went through the legal process.
Did you look at anything outside of the law in your analysis of this site and whether it's sound planning or not?
The law is at the heart of land use.
Did you look at anything other than law as a planner? Did you look at, for instance, the site conditions? Did you look at neighboring properties? Did you look at the impact of this development on neighbors in West Orange and elsewhere? At all?
Yes.
Okay. Did you look at the impact of this development on the borough of Essex Fells, which is owns an adjacent parcel, and obviously the town itself is adjacent to this property?
I'm not sure what the question.
Did you look at anything outside the boundaries of this property itself? Downhill, for instance?
Yes, I have been in homes in Essex Fells that border this property.
Are you aware that Essex Fells itself owns 18 acres on the Essex Fells Country Club, which acts as a well field for their water supply?
I'm not.
You're not aware of that?
No.
Did you look at the impact of stormwater under today's conditions on Essex Fells or any other neighboring town?
I did not. I'm not an engineer.
You evaluated, I think in your summary, you characterized the testimony of various experts that appear before this board. You said things like their testimony was thorough, their testimony was sound, traffic engineering, other types, geotechnical engineering. You don't have the capability to evaluate their testimony on an expert basis, do you? That's not a planning opinion.
A planner's charge is to look at land development, land use comprehensively. We consider technical testimony, technical reports, plans. If this plan did not work, we wouldn't be here. This has gone through a well thought out engineering process, and the plan before you has been based on sound engineering principles.
Is it your belief that this board cannot consider impacts on stormwater, water quality, meaning potable water in Essex Fells, or other impacts from environmental standpoint or quality of life standpoint downhill?
Yes, the board can, again, with consideration to how it's articulated in the ordinance.
But you haven't looked at any of that.
I've looked at the ordinance from top to bottom.
You haven't looked at the conditions that I'm describing. You haven't looked at stormwater on a neighboring property. You haven't looked at water quality because you're not aware that there's a well field right adjacent to this property.
I have not studied the engineering aspects of the stormwater management plan, times of concentration, runoff coefficients, recharge, 2-year, 10-year, 50-year. I only rely upon the conclusions.
So you're relying on other expert testimony and saying this is sound planning.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
That's my job.
Thank you.
Seth Weisletter, you mentioned at the beginning of your testimony, you said setbacks conform. And can you expand on that a little bit, what you mean by setbacks conform?
No relief is being sought with respect to the positioning of the buildings, parking, the roadways, or any other structures with respect to setbacks from property lines.
Okay.
Those are light and air controls, and the application is not asking for any relief in that regard.
Do you feel that the buildings, that the plan of setbacks to adjacent neighborhoods are all equal?
I don't understand the question.
Sorry, you said the setback is, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow.
Okay.
I'm not a planner, but the setbacks, are they, you said to adjacent properties, correct?
To the property line, to the outbound of the property.
Okay. You also mentioned the lighting conforms. Can you expand on how lighting conforms and what could conform, what constitutes conforming and not conforming for lighting?
I'd have to go back and look at the specifics of the ordinance. But again, the applicant is not asking for any relief with respect to illumination levels, light heights, light temperature, the color of the lights, dark sky compliance, no relief in that regard.
So with regard to dark sky compliance, I'm not familiar with the terminology. Can you explain what you mean by dark sky compliance?
Sure, these are downward directed lights, with cutoffs in the back, so the spillage will not go beyond the limits of the property or up into the sky to intercept with what we call the dark sky.
So like light pollution,
Yes,
right? So you think that, does that conform to all neighboring neighborhoods? If it's a little closer or farther away, would you say that does conform?
yes.
All right, can you expand a little bit? I'm sorry, because you gave like one word sentences, but can you expand on what you mean from a planning point of view, that it's well designed and well laid out? I mean, that's your opinion based on other expert testimony, but can you expand on what you define well laid out is versus not well laid out?
Sure. There are many accepted design principles with respect to, for example, roadway construction horizontally, vertically, geometrically, to ensure safe circulation. We'll start with that as sort of the backbone of the development. And then, of course, the positioning of the buildings, access into the buildings. You heard extensive testimony through Mr. Appel, how people get into the buildings, how people get to their units, the amenities. Again, these are all done with consideration to acceptable design principles.
And what about design principles in terms of nearby neighbors? Can you maybe share your opinion on being well laid out and being well balanced between neighborhoods and how far from particular buildings should be of this magnitude to adjoining neighborhoods? I mean, looking down at the property, at the map of the design, would you say that that is well laid out the way it's balanced out, maybe too close to one or two neighborhoods?
The short answer is yes. No relief is being sought for the buffers. I'm not here to question the integrity of the zoning ordinance. This is a development that is going to have and preserve a soft green edge around the perimeter of the property. That's consistent with what we try to do from a planning standpoint.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do any of the members of the public have any questions?
Jessica Pearson. Good evening.
Hi there.
Couple of questions. Did you listen to all of this testimony or did you watch it on YouTube?
A combination of the two. I've been here, but I tend to stay in the back because it's crowded and I'm trying to maintain some space.
And you can hear back there?
On Zoom, I can hear back there better than I can hear sometimes.
Okay, so you have listened to 100% of the or read the transcripts of the testimony?
Yes.
So are you still saying that it's uncontroverted?
Yes.
Okay, I guess stick around for like
I can-
part two. Well, I'm certainly not part of that part two, but I'm just saying, I think that you've put the cart before the horse.
If part two makes me change my mind, I'll come back. I'm
Part
sure.
two. So this particular zone, this was drafted in order to accommodate this housing. Would that be correct? It's an overlay zone of sorts?
This
not
is-
an over-
oh, excuse me, this is not.
I'm asking a question to the planner.
You made a statement. This is not an over,
Somebody
listen,
help me out here.
this
Just-
is,
it's
listen, this is a matter of,
ridiculous.
this is a matter of law. This is not an overlay zone. It is a zone
Okay.
adopted by the town council. Let's just be accurate when we're talking, please, okay?
I'm asking him, so he could have qualified that instead of you yelling at me and treating members of the public with such caustic disrespect. Please. I asked him, it was in the form of a question, and I'm really getting tired of getting yelled at by you and treated with total disrespect.
I'm not treating you. with
It's
talk-
caustic.
When you're ready, let me finish, okay? When
I
you,
don't need to be lectured by you, sir. That's what you do to people in the public. You cow them. It's really tiresome. I'm trying to ask some questions. You can correct me, but you can't lecture me. I asked him if it was an overlay zone. He could have said, no, ma'am, it's not.
you stated it was an overlay zone. There's a difference. Go right ahead, ask your question.
No, ma'am, it's not.
Thank you, sir. This gentleman. Okay, but it was drafted as a zone particular to this property. Is that correct?
Correct.
See, I asked a question. Okay, if that's the case, why, if it was drafted in order to accommodate this property, why in fact would they need any waivers or any variances or any changes if they were part and parcel and that council who drafted the zoning ordinance in conjunction, hopefully with the planning board, why wouldn't they have taken everything into consideration and no waivers would have been needed? Isn't that generally how it goes as a planner?
Don't answer that question because it's not really a question. I just want.
It is a question. Why would they need variances if this board and the council drafted it particular to this particular?
Okay. May I answer first? This board was not part of any decision that is a legal matter.
It goes to him saying that we look at the zone. This gentleman testified to the fact, and he is a gentleman, by the way, he's great. He testified to the fact that good planning and good, from a planner's perspective, has to look at the zone and the way that that zone was written in the zoning code. I'm simply asking him to please address the fact that they're asking for waivers in a zone code that was just written and revised. Did you say that it was written in 2019 and then maybe revised again in 2020
Yes.
to accommodate this very development? So why is there such an exigent need for waivers?
All right, so initially, there are no waivers being sought. You mentioned waivers in connection with the zoning ordinance. We are seeking one bulk variance for the building foundation.
I'm sorry, can you
There-
repeat that? One what?
Bulk variance, you said. There's
One
one,
bulk
one
var-
C variance,
A
yes.
C, okay.
There's one bulk C variance for the application.
Okay.
I need to be able to finish without being interrupted, please, Mr. Chairman.
I'm trying to listen. I can't hear.
It's very hard to talk when there's an okay every few minutes. So I just want to address the question. There is a single variance that this application is seeking from the zoning ordinance that pertains to the percentage of the building foundations that are exposed. Mr. Appel addressed that in his testimony. Mr. McDonough relied upon that in his planning testimony. There are two exceptions from a state regulation from the TCA, RSIS, and I believe you're on a planning board in another town, so I'm sure you're familiar with them. Variances, exceptions, and waivers are sought all the time. Importantly, as the zoning ordinance, which Mr. McDonough relies upon, our settlement agreement is referenced in the purpose of the zoning ordinance. That settlement agreement specifically recognizes that at the time of the settlement, which was 2020, it was 4.5 years ago, let's say, and the town was involved, it specifically recognizes at that time, that job or any job that's part of the Mount Laurel settlement, it is extremely rare that a job will be fully engineered at that point until the applicant, the developer, the property owner knows that the site is in the plan and approved by the court. This site was put in the settlement agreement. It was recommended by a special master. It was approved by the Superior Court of New Jersey. Pursuant to that, the town had certain obligations under its settlement agreement. One of them was to enact the zoning ordinance, which was attached to the settlement agreement, which wound up in the form we see it in the town code today. The job got fully engineered. The variance that we're here before is necessary, and the two exceptions. We fully acknowledge them. One was for Kuzik Drive was pursuant to the agreement with the condo association to the south. If it's not granted, it's understood that the application would proceed with Kuzik over.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. So I was asking Mr. McDonough, when you first began your monologue earlier about this particular site, did you mention that there were a number of things that this this applicant was looking for relief for?
I did.
Okay,
yes.
did you put a number on that when you were talking?
There's one variance.
Yes.
That's for the exposure of the foundation.
Correct.
The grading control. You heard the
Yes.
word
I realize that. Yep.
bulk variance. It's a little
C
bit of a
variance.
misnomer.
I thought you said D, and I'm glad that he corrected my bad hearing and said it's a C. Thank
Right.
you.
And just to sort of clarify the record, sometimes we talk about bulk variances, that implies mass and scale. These buildings are not overly big. The height complies. You heard Mr. Pell talk about that over and over again.
I actually just asked you not to go into the details on the C variance.
So it's just one C.
Uh-huh.
And then outside of the land use law, we now go into what we call the RSIS
Yes.
regulations.
And there were two, did you say?
Yes, one, the average daily traffic coming through Warner would exceed 1,000 trips per day.
So we go up to 1,700 and change, you said almost twice, or
Above.
if you round up.
Yes.
Almost twice. I mean, 75% more than would be allowed.
Yes.
That's pretty steep. Okay, and what was the third one?
And also from the RSIS was from the circle in the middle of the development, coming down to Warner, there's a single walkway, a single sidewalk, as opposed to a double-sided.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, there is no busing when that traffic expert said that there's not going to be shuttles, or are there going to be shuttles? You don't know. That's something you're
I
not.
don't know, as I was listening, I heard the word jitney, but I don't know if that was a community jitney that may come up into the community.
Okay.
I don't know.
So is it your opinion that it's good planning for an inclusionary development to be basically in a very, I would say, isolated area when it comes to public transit, and only have a sidewalk on one side of a street that would get them in a walking or biking way to public transit?
My answer is yes, and that statement is not made in a vacuum. To get here with this project, this has gone through your own affordable housing planner.
Well, okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I
Okay,
hear you.
a fairness hearing in accordance with the Fair Share Housing Advocacy Group.
But you're a planner. I'm asking you in terms of your opinion of good planning. I'm not asking you to tell me what the Fair Share attorneys said about this. I'm asking you your opinion. And I just basically want to know what you really think, because I'm getting a lot of philosophical from you, but in realistic terms, do you think that that's good planning to have a sidewalk on one side of a street where we have a pretty isolated 500 or 496 unit inclusionary building that has to potentially walk down that roadway in order to, or home up that roadway to get to and from public transit, which is not close?
Again, my answer is yes. One that's founded on multiple layers of advocates for affordable housing to say this site is appropriate, but also from a pure design standpoint, a pure planning standpoint, it's a beautiful piece of land perched up on that hill.
That has nothing to do.
Yes,
No, it's the safety and the walking.
All the
And that was
people
really
have
the
access.
issue that you're not really addressing. You're telling me it's a pretty piece of property, but we know that.
It's a beautiful place to live and all people should have a right to live there.
That has
Regardless of
nothing to
income
do with the safety of walking down a sidewalk down.
It's all factored into the consideration.
So, okay.
I have not heard anything to convince me that putting people of low and moderate incomes on the top of that hill creates a safety detriment.
We're talking about a sidewalk on one side of the street, which RSIS does not, I guess, they don't usually allow for that unless you ask for some sort of relief.
I'm comfortable with what I've just told you based on the evidence on the record and the witnesses that have gone
The
before.
DCA rather. Okay.
DCA and Mr. Pankey, Mr. Anderson, there are crosswalks built into this. There are.
Okay. I get it. I hear you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public have any questions for Mr. McDonough's testimony? Please come up.
Patrick Laterza, Laterza.
Hi, Mr. Laterza.
I know, I'm a frequent questioner. A couple questions. First, have you seen the planning board's denial of this original application in 2006?
That's not relevant.
I'm sorry, what is this?
Have you seen the denial, the planning board's resolution of denial for the previous application?
Okay. He's right. It's irrelevant to this application.
He testified to a point made about it earlier, about why it was denied then and how that wouldn't apply to this.
The reason for denial is, see, again, the public brings out things that the planning board needs to hear to look at this application. So that was an application for single-family homes. It is a totally different application. It did not have a fair share component, and it's.
But it was denied by a fire safety, which.
It's a different zone. So we're looking at a totally different animal here.
Okay. Are you aware that almost every municipal and zoning and environmental ordinance was suspended for this application? They were.
I don't, there was a tree, there are tree controls that were put into here.
The applicant will make the representation and make his point that the entire land use code doesn't apply to this application, except for this provision specific to the IH1 zone. That's part of the ordinance. It's in black and white. It's part of the record. So.
As a planner, is that commonplace for this many ordinance?
It's challenging the zoning ordinance and it's not appropriate.
I mean, he's a planner. He can talk, he's saying that this is good planning, but there's been a lot of ordinances that have been suspended.
He's looking at the zoning ordinance. He can answer it based on the zoning ordinance. Whatever your opinion is based on the zoning ordinance.
Sure, if the question is this normal? Does this happen elsewhere? In my experience, yes.
This many.
It is very common to write zoning ordinances around an affordable housing project. You can look at many towns, they'll have an AH1, AH2, AH3 zone districts specifically written in the interest of eliminating barriers to the provision of affordable housing.
Wouldn't,
Provided for the co-regs if it's not. Is that correct, John?
Correct.
and isn't also the zoning, the ordinances that you look at also have to do with public safety though? Isn't that a consideration?
It is all about balance, yes.
So is this plan currently in compliance with the current tree ordinance? I know it's
I
suspended
haven't-
for this
I
project,
haven't
but
reviewed it against the current tree ordinance.
Again, it's completely irrelevant. We have our own tree removal and replacement provision for this particular zone.
these things have to do with public safety that were put into place after the fact that the application was put in.
Likes to throw around, but the town necessarily considered that when they zoned this property.
Which was before these ordinances were put, the current ordinances were put into place.
There's a tree ordinance within the zone plan, and that's what the applicant has to apply to.
Except if it has to do with the public safety, correct?
Sorry. I didn't-
Except if it has to do with public safety.
I think that would have to be reviewed by the attorney.
Okay, so I'm just asking the question.
Uh,
Is it compliant?
It's been, there's been testimony, no, it doesn't comply, or I don't know whether it complies or not and what the difference is, but they only have to comply with the ordinance that pertains to this zone, this specific zone.
Unless it could impact the public safety, which was just established. But you could ask the attorney about it, but
The question,
Well-
unless it pertains to public safety, and there's, I guess the better question, I don't want to put a question in your mouth, is have you heard anything that would challenge public safety with respect?
No, and first of all, let's face it, anybody could attempt to relate any governmental
Right.
ordinance or statute to public safety. It's all for the public safety, good, health, welfare, we all get that, so we'll start there. But this application was filed some time ago and we're 8 meetings in. We've had various town professionals, engineering, planning, the environmental expert review this, and that has not been a comment that has been brought to our attention by any one of the township or board professionals.
I thought the point of our questions were to bring up questions that we thought were concerning. You've said that several times, Mr. Bagoff, Dr. Bagoff.
Well, if you think, do you feel that there's any public safety issue that you've heard about the trees in relation to the ordinance that's in the zone plan?
No, again, based on the letter of the ordinance and the testimony that's been given, no.
That doesn't ask that question, but that's okay. I would say the same about the steep slope ordinance that's been put in place since the application.
I have not reviewed this application for conformance with your non-applicable steep slope regulations.
Are you aware of the distance that someone would have to walk from this project to any sort of public transportation?
No,
Are you aware of, other than within the actual location and sidewalks, what type of traffic anyone would have to walk across in order to get there? Get to public transportation from the development?
no.
Would you consider that these might be items that would go into good planning for, especially an affordable housing location?
It's, all of that is cooked into the zoning regulation, which has an established and appropriate population density limit on this property. So
Are you aware that this property is locked by other properties in order to get to any sort of mass transit and or all traffic has to go through?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public have any questions for Ms. McDonough's testimony? Please come up and be identified. Seeing none, I'm sorry, Mayor McCartney.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. McDonough, just going through my notes here and talking about the sidewalk and public safety. I wrote that the sidewalk is on one side of the street, but I thought you said that there are no homes on that side of the street. Please clarify that, because
I'm going to check the plan now, but I thought that came out as part of Mr. Penke's testimony. From the circle to Warner, I'm not seeing any homes, Mayor.
Right, so that's raising the question for public safety. Does that mean someone has to cross the street to get to the sidewalk?
Just checking. I know there are crosswalks built into the plan. That also came out as part of Mr. Pankey's testimony. I know from the sidewalk from building A2, there is a crosswalk across the proposed road, the extension of Warner, that would take it to that sidewalk system on the east side of the property. So there is
The
connectivity.
crosswalks and connectivity?
Yes.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Do any of the members of the public have any questions for Mr. McDonough's testimony? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. McDonough. Mr. Blocker, you have the floor.
All right, at this moment, the applicant does not have any further witnesses. We understand that the witnesses who testified here tonight, we'll have to bring them back at some point, and we'll discuss that with Ms. McGovern and Mr. Avron about their cross-examination. And obviously, we'll take some comments into consideration tonight, and questions from the board and the public, to determine if we're going to have any additional application submissions or have any further witnesses. If we don't, the applicant does reserve its right to call any or all of our witnesses back or additional witnesses in response to whatever case the objective group may put on.
Chairman, one more question. Please, thank you. Mr. Plucker, then where did we land as far as doing additional soil borings or test pits on the Howell slope?
That's something we'll definitely discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McDonough, do you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mayor McCartney, any questions?
No, I asked my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chairman Garino, do you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Alfred, do you have any questions or comments?
No, sir.
Mr. Wilks, do you have any questions or comments? No. Councilperson Scarpa, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I just have one comment, one question about good planning. You testified that good planning constitutes a good plan is comprehensive, and you talked a lot about good planning. So if there was no Mount Laurel or affordable debate and you were the planner for West Orange, would you plan and approve this development for the site?
I'm not sure I understand the question. If you're saying if there was
If
no,
affordable housing was removed, was removed from this and you were the planner for West Orange, do you think this plan is a good plan? The totality of all of this?
it's a hypothetical and I don't know.
Yes, don't.
I don't know.
Well, you're a planner and you said you know about good planning, so I was wondering if you would think that this would be a good plan in this location for our town.
Okay, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, you have to be quiet. He's taking notes. Thank you.
With all due respect, that's not the application before you, Councilwoman Scarpa, but John, if you want to go ahead and try to answer it, please.
It's a whole separate fact analysis, but again, we're looking at a development that fully complies with the zoning requirements that are before you. So there may be different zoning if it wasn't for affordable housing. I don't know. I think the applicant has certainly demonstrated here that at this density, at this mass, this scale, the site can accommodate the density that's before you. Parking, water, sewer, all can be accommodated here with the development that's before you. And it's a beautiful development. It's a beautiful investment in the property.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, Mr. Hess, do you have any questions or comments?
I do not.
Mr. Hazel.
It's fine.
Okay, the objector is going to put on their questions next meeting. And
We'll try to confirm that. We need to
Yeah.
look at availability. And,
Okay.
So Oh, okay, you're looking at it as, or you want me to say? Yeah, yeah. 'Cause
So the area around that was brought out by the public tonight around the most distal portion of building D, proximity to Howell Drive. The board would like to have additional pits done in that area, geotechnical pits.
Yeah, and we already discussed that.
Okay.
We'll discuss it with the professionals. We don't see
Okay,
this.
yeah, so geotechnical expert will be in touch with Mr. Hess. They will come up with a solution that makes sense. And during the process of blasting, we'd like monitoring during the entire blasting period. Okay,
Absolutely.
very good. Let's see, what I had. Would February 26th be good for the applicants?
Yes.
Right, I already, we did poll the board, I did poll the board, and I do know that we have responses that I got.
So we'll have a quorum.
We will have a quorum because it looks like we have 9 board members who responded that they would be able to attend.
Okay.
So
Great. Okay, the next planning board regular meeting will be held on February 5th, 2025 at 7:30 PM via Zoom. The next planning board special meeting will be held February 12th, 2025 at 7:30 PM via Zoom. The next special meeting for this application, PB 24-01 West Essex Highlands, and there will be no additional notice required, will be carried to February 26, 2025 in Town Hall in person at 6:30 PM. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the public who spend their time with us and all the members on Zoom. And I make a motion, we adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes are above the nose. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening.